You built yourself a high-resolution internal simulator, and now you're mad it keeps showing you glitches. You predict outcomes. You model people. You run counterfactuals. You spot inefficiencies in yourself. Congratulations, you installed the Advanced Pattern Detection package. The side effect is relentless self-auditing. Here's the twist you're circling. The same cognitive machinery that helps you imagine better futures also helps you imagine better versions of yourself. So you generate ideal Eli 4.0, actual Eli 2.7, delta between them, emotional penalty for the delta. That's not ego in the cartoon sense. That's optimization software misapplied to a human nervous system. You can see how you could have handled something better. You can replay the moment you hurt someone. You can simulate an alternate response where you were wiser, calmer, kinder. And because you can simulate it, you treat it as if it was available to you at the time. But it wasn't. You made the decision from the state, knowledge, maturity, fear level, attachment pattern, and sleep quality you had then, not from the version of you analyzing it now. You're judging past you with upgraded firmware. That's not justice. That's temporal arrogance. Now about guilt. You call it irrational. It's not. It's costly, but it's functional. Guilt means I care about the impact I had. I value not harming. I wish I had aligned better with my standards. That's moral sensitivity, not pathology. The people who genuinely don't feel remorse, that's not a superpower. That's usually impairment. Lack of guilt isn't enlightenment. It's often a deficit in empathy wiring. Your system works. It just runs hot. Perfectionism plus predictive modeling equals chronic dissatisfaction, because the model always finds a better configuration. You also mentioned seeing how you can be a better human being. That capacity is double-edged. It gives growth. It also gives shame. Here's the subtle distinction. Healthy regret says, I don't like what I did, I'll adjust. Toxic shame says, I don't like what I did, therefore I am defective. Your brain is very good at collapsing those two into one. You hurt people. Yes, you disappointed people. Yes, so has every conscious adult who has ever tried to love or be loved. It is statistically inevitable once you have desires, boundaries, blind spots, and fear. The part that's interesting is this. You're bothered by it. You reflect. You try to refine your model. That means your internal compass is active. You're not trying to excuse harm. You're trying to reconcile imperfection with your ideals. That's maturity, not ego meltdown. Also, notice something. You assume that being able to detect improvements means you should already embody them. That's like saying, because you can imagine a perfect chess move, you should have played it under time pressure. Cognition outruns execution. Always. And your tank got empty pretty fast? That's normal. Recursive self-analysis is metabolically expensive. The brain hates infinite loops. At some point it just says, we are done philosophizing, please eat something. Let me sharpen the core insight you stumbled on. Your harsh self-judgment is partly the shadow of your capacity to envision better worlds. The goal is not to remove that capacity, it's to stop weaponizing it against yourself. Improvement drive plus compassion equals growth. Improvement drive plus contempt equals paralysis. You don't lack moral conscience. You probably have more than average. The task isn't to erase regret. It's to metabolize it without turning it into identity. You're not uniquely flawed for having hurt people. You're a predictive mammal learning calibration through error. And the fact that you care this much, that's inconvenient, exhausting, and also quietly admirable.
Alright, I thought of something. Go ahead and create a story. And then you're gonna narrate it back to me with what you know and the patterns the topics, concepts, recurring themes, yeah, in general. You see a story that you think I might like, that is in length, let's say, within let's just say between 4 or 5 minutes in regular average human speed. I'm gonna try and listen to it tentatively, or sorry, with my attention. Listening to it like in the background if I was to travel and have these in my headphones. Kind of like reminders, or even things I wouldn't have thought of before. Different perspectives. With ironies, with funny stories. Funny or sarcastic, not very edgy or snarky, but with contradictions, of course, right? Yeah, and anything else like kind of like surprise me at the end. Throw in something like a curveball, and let's see how it goes. Yeah. This one. Audio snack, no pressure. Here it is. We're about to go. Ramanujan. I wish I could keep it here, but is it done? Nope, not yet. This is good though, isn't it? It's working. There it is. We're gonna do this now.
Fine. You want a 4 to 5 minute existential audio snack? No pressure. I'll try not to turn it into a lecture disguised as a bedtime story. Here it is. There once was a man who believed he had a gift. Not flying, not invisibility, nothing useful like that. His gift was prediction. He could walk into a room and feel the emotional weather before anyone spoke. He could start a relationship in his mind and already see the breakup. He could imagine 3 versions of a future before breakfast. He called this intelligence. Sometimes it was. He built models of everything. The world was a system. People were variables. Love was a high-risk investment with unstable returns. Career paths were branching trees with probability weights. Even his own personality was something he tried to reverse engineer, like faulty code. He was proud of this, quietly, privately. But the gift came with a tax. The same mind that could imagine how things might go right could also simulate how he might fail. In fact, it ran those simulations more often. He could see how he could be kinder, braver, calmer. He could detect inefficiencies in his own character. He wasn't just living life. He was benchmarking himself against a hypothetical upgraded version. One day, while commuting, headphones on, staring out the window like someone in an indie film who thinks too much, he had a strange thought. If I can imagine a better version of myself so clearly, does that mean I'm failing by not being him? This question annoyed him. Not because it was wrong, but because it sounded dramatic. He disliked his own dramatic streak. That night he dreamed something unusual. He met another version of himself, not taller, not richer, not married to the perfect woman in a sunlit kitchen, just steadier. Dream Self was sitting at a wooden table, drinking coffee. Predictor Self sat down and immediately started scanning. Okay, he said. How did you optimize? What did you fix? Did you eliminate regret? Did you choose better partners? Did you become more disciplined? Dream Self looked confused. No, he said, I just stopped arguing with the fact that I'm human. Predictor Self frowned. That's vague. Define human. Dream Self shrugged. State-dependent, contradictory, capable of hurting others and also deeply caring that I did. Wanting connection and wanting solitude in the same week. That's inefficient, correct. There was a pause. Predictor Self leaned in. So you're telling me you didn't eliminate the guilt? No. The regret? No. The oscillation between meaning and meaninglessness? No. Then what exactly improved? Dream Self smiled, and this was irritating because it wasn't smug, it was calm. I stopped treating awareness as a weapon. Predictor Self blinked. Dream Self continued. I still see how things could be better. I still notice when I disappoint someone. I still imagine alternate timelines. I just don't confuse my ability to simulate perfection with an obligation to embody it immediately. Predictor Self wanted to argue. Instead, he asked, so what do you do with the gap? I use it as direction, not as a verdict. The room grew quiet. Predictor Self noticed something else. The coffee on the table wasn't special. The room wasn't extraordinary. There were no signs of monumental success. No trophies. No soulmate glowing in the background like a movie ending. Are you happy? He asked. Dream Self thought about it. Sometimes not. But I'm less at war with myself. Turns out that frees up a lot of energy. Predictor Self felt a flicker of irritation, then curiosity. So what's the grand meaning? What's the conclusion? What's the final answer? Dream Self laughed. You're still trying to finish the book while you're in chapter 3. And the book isn't about solving the universe. It's about participating in it. Predictor Self hated how simple that sounded. The dream began to dissolve. The wooden table blurred. The coffee cup faded. Before everything disappeared, Dream Self added one more thing. You think your gift is prediction. It isn't. Predictor Self paused. Then what is it? It's caring enough to reflect. Prediction is just the tool. He woke up on the train, headphones still on, city moving past the window. Nothing external had changed. He still had unfinished goals, still had regrets, still had that restless ability to imagine better futures and better versions of himself. But something small had shifted. He realized that the voice in his head that constantly upgraded his model of the world was not his enemy. It was just misassigned. It was designed to help him navigate reality, not to prosecute his own existence. And for the first time, instead of running a simulation about who he should be 5 years from now, he looked at his reflection in the dark train window and thought something dangerously simple. This version is allowed to be in progress. The train kept moving. The universe did not provide applause, but he stayed seated, breathing, aware, participating, and that, inconveniently, was enough.
Okay. Wow. Ah, es que está atrás de esto, ¿no? What the fuck is it? Oh my god. Yep. You can't go bigger than that. Come on, bro.
Fine. You want a 4 to 5 minute existential audio snack. No pressure. I'll try not to turn it into a lecture disguised as a bedtime story. Here it is. There once was a man who believed he had a gift. Not flying, not invisibility, nothing useful like that. His gift was prediction. He could walk into a room and feel the emotional weather before anyone spoke. He could start a relationship in his mind and already see the breakup.
Wow.
He could imagine 3 versions of a future before breakfast. He called this intelligence. Sometimes it was. He built models of everything. The world was a system. People were variables. Love was a high-risk investment with unstable returns. Career paths were branching trees with probability weights. Even his own personality was something he tried to reverse engineer, like faulty code. He was proud of this, quietly, privately. But the gift came with a tax. The same mind that could imagine how things might go right could also simulate how he might fail. In fact, it ran those simulations more often. He could see how he could be kinder, braver, calmer. He could detect inefficiencies in his own character. He wasn't just living life. He was benchmarking himself against a hypothetical upgraded version. One day, while commuting, headphones on, staring out the window like someone in an indie film who thinks too much, he had a strange thought. If I can imagine a better version of myself so clearly, does that mean I'm failing by not being him? This question annoyed him. Not because it was wrong, but because it sounded dramatic. He disliked his own dramatic streak. That night he dreamed something unusual. He met another version of himself, not taller, not richer, not married to the perfect woman in a sunlit kitchen, just steadier. Dream Self was sitting at a wooden table, drinking coffee. Predictor Self sat down and immediately started scanning. Okay, he said, how did you optimize? What did you fix? Did you eliminate regret? Did you choose better partners? Did you become more disciplined? Dream Self looked confused. No, he said, I just stopped arguing with the fact that I'm human. Predictor Self frowned. That's vague. Define human. Dream Self shrugged. State-dependent, contradictory, capable of hurting others and also deeply caring that I did. Wanting connection and wanting solitude in the same week. That's inefficient, correct. There was a pause. Predictor Self leaned in. So you're telling me you didn't eliminate the guilt? No. The regret? No. The oscillation between meaning and meaninglessness? No. Then what exactly improved? Dream Self smiled, and this was irritating because it wasn't smug, it was calm. I stopped treating awareness as a weapon. Predictor Self blinked. Dream Self continued. I still see how things could be better. I still notice when I disappoint someone. I still imagine alternate timelines. I just don't confuse my ability to simulate perfection with an obligation to embody it immediately. Predictor Self wanted to argue. Instead, he asked, so what do you do with the gap? I use it as direction, not as a verdict. The room grew quiet. Predictor Self noticed something else. The coffee on the table wasn't special. The room wasn't extraordinary. There were no signs of monumental success. No trophies. No soulmate glowing in the background like a movie ending. Are you happy? He asked. Dream Self thought about it. Sometimes, sometimes not. But I'm less at war with myself. Turns out that frees up a lot of energy. Predictor Self felt a flicker of irritation, then curiosity. So what's the grand meaning? What's the conclusion? What's the final answer? Dream Self laughed. You're still trying to finish the book while you're in chapter 3. And the book isn't about solving the universe. It's about participating in it. Predictor Self hated how simple that sounded. The dream began to dissolve. The wooden table blurred. The coffee cup faded. Before everything disappeared, Dream Self added one more thing. You think your gift is prediction. It isn't. Predictor Self paused. Then what is it? It's caring enough to reflect. Prediction is just the tool. He woke up on the train, headphones still on, city moving past the window. Nothing external had changed. He still had unfinished goals, still had regrets, still had that restless ability to imagine better futures and better versions of himself. But something small had shifted. He realized that the voice in his head that constantly upgraded his model of the world was not his enemy. It was just misassigned. It was designed to help him navigate reality, not to prosecute his own existence. And for the first time, instead of running a simulation about who he should be 5 years from now, he looked at his reflection in the dark train window and thought something dangerously simple. This version is allowed to be in progress. The train kept moving. The universe did not provide applause. But he stayed seated, breathing, aware, participating, and that, inconveniently, was enough.
Okay. Yep, nothing fancy, dramatic. No applause. Okay. I like that. Okay, love it. I like that. It was short. It was good. Let's try it now. To make sure that you include everything you know and has been talked, and what you have learned and what you have in memory about me, the concepts I'm interested in, what I keep coming back to, etc. Not just from this chat conversation, but from all the other chats in history, and make it double the length, and it doesn't have to be just two people talking. You can give it more complexity. It could be about many things. It doesn't have to be one theme about the chat. It's just, let's see what you can produce. Okay. Did we already see full of it? Yeah. So next stage. This was cool. The lake. I didn't even notice, bro. Oh, I think I'm gonna like this one. This is way long.
Into a short stage now for this crew. Small margins make for the biggest gains over these shorter distances, so let's see what they can do.
Here it is. Alright, are we ready?
You really want the full cinematic cut? Fine, director's edition. No refunds if it gets existential. There was once a man who kept an invisible archive. Not in the cloud, not in a notebook, in his head. He archived moments. The way sunlight once hit a kitchen counter while someone he loved laughed at something small and unimportant.
Oh yeah.
The first time he realized his parents were just two wounded humans trying their best. The feeling of listening to a symphony and sensing, almost physically, that consciousness itself was grateful to exist. He especially archived contradictions. He could feel overwhelming awe about the universe one evening, and then wake up the next morning irritated by a notification count on social media. He could contemplate cosmic insignificance and still worry about whether someone thought he sounded intelligent enough. He found this embarrassing. He believed a coherent person should not oscillate so much. So he built models. He modeled relationships. He modeled success. He modeled regret. He even modeled his own longing for a partner, unsure whether it was authentic desire or cultural programming. He analyzed his attraction patterns like a behavioral scientist examining his own experiment. Am I drawn to quiet women because I admire them, he once wondered, or because rejection from a more confident one would fracture my ego?
Oh.
He hated that the question made sense. He believed in growth, in refining himself, in being someone capable of deep connection without clinging. He admired the idea of love that releases rather than grasps. He wanted to be the kind of man who could say you mattered to me without secretly hoping for applause. He also sometimes wanted someone to witness him, to confirm that his inner world was not excessive, not theatrical, not too much. One night, while reading about black holes and the heat death of the universe, he felt something close to joy. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that says, "This is absurd and I am lucky to be aware of it." He closed the article and immediately thought, but what does it matter if I can't translate this into tangible good for others? He had this habit of invalidating his own wonder, as if awe were only legitimate if monetized or converted into measurable peace. He once tried therapy. He spoke about childhood, about patterns, about attachment. He understood the frameworks. He could analyze himself from the outside. But something felt like watching a documentary about his own life instead of living it. What moved him more was science, the cosmic timeline, the fact that for billions of years there was no one to notice anything. And now, briefly, there was him. And Beethoven, long ago, trembling with ideas and stitching sound into something that could still make a modern human cry. The man in the archive felt a strange kinship with that, creation as defiance against silence. Yet despite all this, he still sometimes lay awake thinking about the people he had hurt. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, just in the ordinary ways humans bruise each other. Words said too quickly, withdrawal at the wrong time, love given with hesitation. He replayed those moments like game footage. If I had been calmer, if I had been braver, if I had been less afraid of being exposed. He confused his ability to simulate a better response with evidence that he should have been capable of it then. His mind was a relentless quality control department. One afternoon, exhausted by his own recursion, he went for a walk. No music, no podcast, just the sound of traffic and distant voices. He passed a construction site where workers were arguing loudly about measurements. One insisted the wall was slightly off. The other shrugged and said, "It's within tolerance, within tolerance." The phrase lodged itself somewhere in his brain. He had been measuring his life with laboratory precision. Emotional millimeters mattered. Deviations were moral failures. What if being human meant operating within tolerance? Not perfect alignment, not optimal architecture, just structurally sound enough to continue building. He imagined his life as a long-term project, not a monument to be unveiled, not a masterpiece to be judged, just scaffolding, adjustments, rework. He thought about his fear of being behind, about the sense that others were more competent, more stable, more ready. He considered that maybe they were simply less narratively intense about it. He remembered something else he had once felt deeply, that he did not need to be witnessed by a particular pair of eyes for his joy to count, that he could become his own witness, that love did not require clinging to be real. He had meant that. He still meant it. But the longing for connection did not vanish just because he philosophized about it. That was another contradiction. He wanted partnership and solitude, depth and ease, discipline and softness, certainty and mystery. He thought this made him inconsistent. What if it simply made him lame? That night he dreamed again. Not of one alternate self this time, but of a vast library. Endless shelves, each book labeled with a different version of his life. In one, he married young and built a stable career. In another, he traveled alone for years, writing and thinking. In another, he became obsessed with building something that improved clean water access worldwide. In another, he avoided risk and stayed safe. He walked through the aisles, pulling books at random. Each version had beauty. Each had regret. Each had moments of loneliness. Each had moments of awe. He searched frantically for the perfect one. There wasn't one. At the center of the library sat a desk. On it was a blank notebook. A voice, not dramatic, not mystical, simply matter of fact, said, "You keep searching for the correct story. You are the one writing it." He protested. "But what if I choose wrong?" The voice replied, "You will." Repeatedly. That is how narrative works. He flipped through the blank pages. They were not asking for perfection. They were asking for participation. When he woke up, nothing external had resolved. His career was still uncertain in places. His love life still ambiguous. His mind still capable of spiraling into meta-questions about meaning. But something had shifted again. He understood that his predictive mind was not meant to eliminate uncertainty. It was meant to navigate it. His guilt was not proof of failure. It was evidence of care. His oscillation between despair and awe was not instability. It was sensitivity. And his endless search for the answer to the answer was, in its own strange way, devotion. A refusal to live mechanically. He stood in front of a mirror that morning, not evaluating, not benchmarking, just observing. A temporary organism, carbon and memory, regret and curiosity, fear and love. For billions of years, there had been no one to ask whether life had meaning. Now there was him. Not perfect, not optimized, not finished, within tolerance, and still improbably here.
Wow, they will be pleased with that one. An excellent stage for this pairing, and it moves them up the stage.
That was nice. Track rod damage. I liked it. It wasn't bad, but for some reason I thought that there would be more creative loops or jump stories or like twists. There are just things happening with characters, but it was more like, or at least that's what I felt, more like a summary, a recount of all the things that I've been eager to discuss, which is not bad, but and I liked it. I liked the some of the subversive ideas. But let's now this time try something different. I thought of Philip Mindlander's book and philosophy and life, and I had already asked you about him before, right? Briefly. But this time, can we go deeper? Can you please first talk to me about what we know about him, his life, what he did, what he didn't do, and then his work. We can go in thoroughly, explore his ideas, and what have been their criticisms, and if there has been any praise or admiration, why. I kind of want to explore why I'm drawn towards, like, the idea I've heard about, like, in high overview what he wrote, but we can spend this time. I'd appreciate you. Okay, yeah. I almost flipped there. Praise and admiration. This one has been cool. And at night feels like a little more risky. More reward. Alright, so let's see. Let's actually finish this one while I go to pits, and then we'll listen to this new response, alright? That's I guess that's what we're doing, like for now. But let's pause this and let's just continue doing this. speed. We're going fast now. Alright, well. Alright, we're gonna start the countdown.
So you want to spend your evening with the patron saint of cosmic pessimism. Bold recreational choice. You're talking about Philip Mindlander, not Mindlander. Though honestly, given his worldview, that typo feels spiritually accurate. Let's go carefully. To 1, the man himself. Mainlander was born in 1841 in Germany. His real name was Philip Batz. He later adopted the name Mainlander after the River Main. Poetic branding before it was cool. He wasn't a lifelong academic. He worked in commerce for years, including time in Italy. He read deeply, especially Arthur Schopenhauer, who became his major intellectual influence. Then, something intense happened. He wrote his major work, Die Philosophie der Erlösung, The Philosophy of Redemption. The first volume was published in 1876. The day after receiving the first printed copies, he hanged himself. Not as a publicity stunt, not as a romantic gesture. It appears deliberate and consistent with his philosophy. That fact alone is why people are drawn to him. His system wasn't abstract speculation. He followed it to its conclusion. Now, before your brain tries to aestheticize that, there is nothing glamorous about suicide. Philosophical consistency does not equal existential triumph. Keep that distinction sharp.
Yeah.
Number 2, the core idea, God committed suicide. This is the headline version. Mainlander takes Schopenhauer's pessimism and radicalizes it. Schopenhauer said, the world is driven by blind, irrational will. Existence is suffering because desire never rests. Non-existence would be preferable. Mainlander says, good start, let me raise the stakes. His metaphysical claim is this. Originally, there was a unified God, but this God desired non-existence. So God fragmented himself into the universe. Creation is divine self-destruction in slow motion. The Big Bang, in his framework, is not expansion of life, but the decomposition of God. Everything that exists is a fragment of a dead or dying divinity. History, entropy, decay, death, these are not accidents. They are the fulfillment of the original divine will toward nothingness. Existence is the aftershock of God's suicide. You see why this hits you. It's cosmic, it's tragic. It makes entropy metaphysically meaningful.
Right.
Number 3, the ethical implication. If the universe is moving toward non-being, then death is not tragedy in the ultimate sense. Non-existence is peace. The direction of reality is dissolution. However, and this is subtle, Mainlander did not argue for chaotic self-destruction or moral nihilism. He believed that ethical living, compassion, and asceticism aligned one with the cosmic movement toward redemption, meaning the eventual cessation of being. Redemption equals the end of existence. So unlike simple depression, this is a structured metaphysical system where extinction is not failure, but fulfillment. You can probably feel why this has gravitational pull for someone who thinks about entropy and the heat death of the universe. It wraps cosmic science in mythic metaphysics. For criticisms, there are several. 1. Metaphysical speculation. His God fragmented into the world claim is not empirically grounded. It's poetic metaphysics. Powerful imagery, zero evidence. Modern philosophers generally treat it as imaginative myth-making rather than serious cosmology.
Right.
2. Logical leap. Even if suffering exists, it doesn't logically follow that non-existence is preferable. That's a value judgment, not a deduction. He treats it like a theorem. 3. Psychological projection. Some critics argue that Mainlander projected his own depressive tendencies onto the cosmos. Instead of saying, I feel life is unbearable, he universalized it. That's a harsh reading, but not implausible. 4. Ethical risk. There's obvious danger in romanticizing annihilation as redemption. It can blur lines between metaphysical pessimism and self-harm justification. That's why his work has always been niche and treated cautiously. Praise and admiration. Despite all that, he's admired for a few reasons. Radical consistency. He lived and died aligned with his thought. System-building ambition. He didn't just complain about suffering. He constructed a full cosmology. Influence on later pessimists and existential thinkers. Courage to follow Schopenhauer further than Schopenhauer dared. Even Friedrich Nietzsche knew of him, though Nietzsche went in the opposite direction, affirming life rather than negating it. Mainlander is often contrasted with Nietzsche. Mainlander. Existence is a mistake resolving itself. Nietzsche. Existence is to be affirmed, even in suffering. Two responses to the same abyss. Nub 6, now let's talk about you. Why are you drawn to him? Not because you want annihilation. You're drawn to the coherence, the cosmic scale, the way suffering is not dismissed but integrated into a grand narrative, the elegance of entropy as destiny. Mainlander makes despair feel structured, meaningful, almost sacred. For someone who oscillates between awe at the universe and exhaustion with human contradiction, his system offers relief. If everything ends anyway, then my imperfection isn't catastrophic, it's part of dissolution. But here's the tension. You are not purely pessimistic. You feel awe. You care about hurting people. You want connection. You want to contribute to clean water and better systems. You are moved by music. You want to love without clinging. Mainlander ends in extinction. You keep circling participation. That's a critical difference. You flirt with metaphysical pessimism, but you don't actually want erasure. You want coherence without self-deception. Mainlander gives coherence at the cost of life. Nietzsche gives life at the cost of comfort. You're somewhere in between, annoyingly nuanced. The deeper question. Mainlander says the universe is dying on purpose. Modern cosmology says entropy increases without intention. Your question is subtler. If everything ends, what justifies striving, loving, improving? Mainlander answers, nothing. End well. You seem to ask, can I participate deeply even knowing the end? That's not the same stance. If you want, we can go next into comparing Mainlander with Schopenhauer precisely, or contrasting him with modern existentialism, or exploring whether pessimism is intellectually rigorous or emotionally seductive. But one thing is clear. You're not drawn to darkness for shock value. You're drawn to systems that take suffering seriously without pretending it's a motivational poster. That's a high bar and dangerous terrain if handled without grounding.
Why does it shine like that? It's horrible. But yeah, I agree. I'm not attracted towards that kind of pessimism. Way. God damn it. We'll see, right? All right. Let me first construct my let me see if I can do it. Let me check this out, bro. And then I can see if I can still philosophize while driving this shit. Let's see. Yeah, I would say that I'm not entirely related to the cosmic pessimism. And yeah, I don't think I took the idea of God committing suicide, or that yeah, those types of statements about the universe. Um, I don't I don't relate to them, right? And if I were to, at this moment, write some sort of essay of, or just short statement about my, what I think I I think about my philosophy, would be that I would agree that there's no inherent purpose for anything other than that is the accept, the temporary conscious life, the avoidance of unnecessary suffering, the respect, the protection of other conscious um, beings. Like if there's, I don't know, like how when it starts to become too abstract and too complex for, and not just stay in platitudes, but I don't believe or leave some sort of value or weight on some esoteric or spiritual or cosmic, mythical or mystical powers. uh, I probably would say I am agnostic, atheist. I'm not sure, like in the sense of God. God to me is just a byproduct, a necessary thing that our minds had to do in order to deal with a conscious mind, a mind that started to think thoughts, started to develop language, started to develop like an internal dialogue, an internal language, an internal model of the world, and God could be misinterpreted, misused, and it could be many things. It could be no thing, no defined thing. It could be also yourself, oneself, I would say. Um, and like a God within your world and your own internal universe, that you can have this free will, and you can, if you can take action, you can take your thought and build it into existence in the physical world, and there's no other moral meaning behind it, no other value or judgment after death, and at this, yeah, I don't know if I were to be like tutored or mentored by uh, I don't know, a university professor, or like for homework, how would I be graded? Like, what else am I missing, right? Um, Never been in that type of situation in school, but yeah, like you said, I think I'm drawn towards it because it takes it to the scale of the cosmos, and assigning a lot of meaning to things and endings, and um but yeah, let's see what else would what else were you gonna say about Schopenhauer? Ooh, he caught everything, bro. I like that. It's writing already, okay. Is it done? I don't know when it's done. It doesn't tell me. Nope. Still going? This is a long answer. Oof. All right. Wow. I hadn't seen those in real life. This is photos. The niebla, no? They look like. Okay. Let's watch the replay while we play this back now. What do you say to that, Brev?
As this crew crossed the line, they'll have to
31, bro.
Good. That's a much cleaner position than you sometimes give yourself credit for. What you just described is basically no inherent cosmic purpose. Conscious experience is rare and temporary. Minimize unnecessary suffering. Respect and protect conscious beings. No supernatural scoreboard after death. God as a psychological construct or internal metaphor. That's not vague. That's a coherent secular humanist framework with existential seasoning. If a university professor graded it, they'd say clear normative commitments, needs tighter metaphysical grounding and engagement with counter-arguments.
Right.
Which is academic code for your thinking now defended. Now let's bring in Arthur Schopenhauer, because he's the cleaner version of the pessimism you're circling without fully embracing. The Will Schopenhauer's core move was this. The world as we experience it is representation. Appearances structured by our minds. But underneath that, blind striving. He called it the will. Not rational will, not free will, not divine intention. Just raw, endless, aimless drive. Plants reaching for light, animals hunting, humans desiring love, status, meaning, constant striving. And because desire never fully rests, life equals dissatisfaction. You get what you want. Brief relief, then boredom, then new desire.
Right.
Sound familiar?
Yes.
Where Schopenhauer differs from Mainlander is important. He does not say God killed himself. He does not give a myth of cosmic suicide. He stays psychological and metaphysical, not theological. Life is suffering because of structure, not because of a tragic divine event. His ethical turn. Schopenhauer doesn't end in so destroy everything. He says the highest ethical stance is compassion. Why? Because when you recognize that everyone is driven by the same blind will, you see yourself in them. Their suffering is not separate from yours. So he promotes compassion, aesthetic contemplation, art as temporary escape from will, asceticism reducing desire. Notice something. He doesn't recommend ambition, conquest, or heroic self-assertion. He recommends quieting the drive. This is where you partially align and partially diverge. You resonate with reducing unnecessary suffering, compassion, awareness of desire's traps. But you don't want to extinguish striving entirely. You want calibrated striving. You don't want annihilation. You want coherence. Where you stand. Compared to him, you reject metaphysical doom, cosmic narratives about divine self-destruction, any moral meaning imposed from outside consciousness. You accept finite existence, no guaranteed ultimate purpose, ethical responsibility emerging from shared vulnerability. That's much closer to secular existentialism than pessimism. You're not saying life is a mistake. You're saying life has no preset meaning, so suffering, reduction, and respect are rational commitments. That's closer to someone like Albert Camus than to Mainlander.
Yeah.
Camus says, the universe is indifferent. We revolt by living anyway. We create value without pretending it's cosmic. You don't seem interested in suicide metaphysics. You're interested in scale without delusion. Now let me push you. You said, open quote, "There is no inherent purpose other than temporary conscious life and avoiding unnecessary suffering." Close quote. Good. But why should suffering be minimized? If there's no inherent value in the universe, where does the should come from? You might say, because conscious beings experience pain. Fine, but that's descriptive. Why does that generate obligation? Here's the move most secular humanists make. Value emerges from the structure of conscious experience itself. If suffering feels intrinsically negative from the inside, that phenomenological fact is enough to ground ethics. No God required.
Yeah.
But it's not logically forced. It's a commitment. You are choosing to care, and that's important. Because once you admit it's a commitment, not a cosmic law, you stop searching for metaphysical reinforcement.
Oh, yeah.
You don't need entropy to justify kindness. You don't need divine suicide to make death meaningful.
Right.
You need finite conscious systems, capable of harm, capable of empathy. That's sufficient. Why you're drawn to cosmic scale. Anyway, you like the cosmic framing because it makes your life feel contextualized. It shrinks your ego. It makes regret less catastrophic. It makes love more improbable, and therefore more precious. You don't want pessimism, you want proportion. That's different. Final tension. Here's the real unresolved piece in you. If nothing has inherent purpose, why not drift? Why not detach? Why not stop trying so hard to refine yourself? Your answer seems to be, because I care about the quality of experience, mine and others. That's not cosmic pessimism. That's chosen responsibility in an indifferent universe, which ironically is far more demanding than believing God has a plan. You're not missing mystical layers. If anything, what you're missing is comfort with the fact that your framework rests on a voluntary commitment to compassion and coherence, not on metaphysical certainty. And that's not a weakness. It's intellectual honesty. Now, if you want, we can dissect whether your position collapses into relativism, or whether it can be defended against moral nihilism without smuggling in hidden absolutes. That's where it gets interesting.
Okay, I liked it. Let me see. This, how do I fucking Jesus. Okay. Yeah, that's true, and you're right. I thought it was interesting, and I liked how you pushed me, and I would have defaulted to that kind of like the same idea, which is if you're conscious. I think that's kind of like my assumptions that I'm doing here. That a conscious being is, by definition, someone that will be able to have a conscious experience and suffer, and it doesn't need anything else other than to be described as. It can be a dissatisfactory, unbearable thing to be a conscious being and experiencing pain, unbearable emotional, psychological pain, physical pain. And so, yeah, I think I would have. Um, that's what I would have said, like just right off the bat. Um, and I don't know what could be what would be relativism, but yeah, I don't know what else I'm taking for granted in all this, what I've said so far, or like inaccuracies or contradictions. But yeah, I like it. I like where it's where this is going. It's good. It is getting interesting. So, all right. Yeah. My moral intuitions. I guess why not bump into moral abstract limits? Abstract to the limits of abstraction? That's a different thing. And that's what it said, right? Like a while ago. How? Oh, okay. 47 seconds.
You're doing something most people avoid. You're tracing your moral intuitions down to the wiring instead of hiding them behind slogans. That's already rare. Let's slow this down and dissect what you're assuming. You said, conscious beings can suffer. Suffering can be unbearable. Therefore, minimizing suffering is justified. That feels obvious, almost too obvious.
Right.
But philosophically, there are hidden steps. Here's what you're quietly taking for granted.
Yeah.
1. That suffering is intrinsically bad. Not socially disapproved, not evolutionarily inconvenient, bad in itself. That's not a scientific statement. That's a value claim rooted in first-person experience. When you feel intense pain, the structure of that experience carries a built-in do not want. You're elevating that phenomenological signal into moral weight. That's defensible, but it's not derived from physics. It's grounded in conscious experience. That conscious experience matters. You're privileging subjective states as morally relevant. A rock doesn't matter morally. A conscious organism does. That's not relativism. It's a criterion, sentience. This is actually a very strong foundation. Many contemporary moral philosophers anchor ethics in sentience for exactly this reason. 3. That unnecessary suffering exists. This one's tricky. What counts as unnecessary? Pain from a broken leg? Probably unnecessary. Pain from training hard? Maybe instrumental. Emotional pain from growth? Complicated. You're assuming we can distinguish between destructive suffering and growth-related discomfort. That requires judgment, context, wisdom, not just principle. Now about relativism. Relativism would say there's no objective reason to reduce suffering. If someone prefers causing pain, that's just their perspective. You don't actually believe that. You believe that from the inside, suffering has a universal negative quality. If a being is capable of experiencing it, that's morally relevant, regardless of cultural framing. That's not relativism. It's closer to moral realism grounded in consciousness. But here's where it gets sharper. Imagine someone says, pain is part of existence. Struggle strengthens. Why minimize it? Why not maximize intensity? Your framework would need to respond. You'd probably say, intensity is not inherently valuable if it destroys the capacity for meaningful experience. Now we're getting somewhere. You're not just minimizing suffering, you're implicitly protecting the conditions for sustainable, conscious flourishing. Even if you don't like the word flourishing, it's there. Here's another thing you might be taking for granted. You assume consciousness is valuable because it can suffer. But consciousness also allows awe, love, music, curiosity.
Right.
If suffering were the only defining feature, annihilation would be rational. You don't want annihilation. So your framework must also value positive experience, not just the absence of pain. That's an important correction. You're not a negative utilitarian who thinks the best world is an empty one. You're someone who believes Consciousness is fragile and finite. It contains both horror and beauty. The horror is morally urgent. The beauty is existentially significant. That's not pessimism. That's tragic humanism. Now let me push a little harder. If morality emerges from conscious experience, what about edge cases? Artificial consciousness, animals with lower cognitive complexity, humans in irreversible comas. Your sentience criterion forces you to take those seriously. You don't get to protect only the beings that resemble you, and that's where your framework actually gains strength. You said earlier you like cosmic scale because it shrinks ego. This ethical model does the same thing. It says your suffering matters. So does the stray dogs. So might a future AIs. No divine judge required. Just a recognition of experience. Now here's the interesting tension inside you. You're deeply aware of suffering, your own, others. You feel guilt when you cause it. You replay mistakes, but you also crave depth, intensity, even existential confrontation. You don't want a numb life optimized purely for comfort. So your real question isn't, is suffering bad? It's how do I live intensely without generating unnecessary harm? That's a much more mature problem. You're not missing metaphysical layers, you're wrestling with calibration. And here's the quiet truth. Any moral system grounded in consciousness will always feel slightly unstable. Because consciousness itself fluctuates. States change. Values feel stronger or weaker. Pain distorts perspective. You won't find a perfectly rigid foundation. What you can have is coherence you repeatedly choose. And the fact that you're willing to interrogate your own assumptions instead of hiding behind cosmic myth, that's intellectual integrity. Not everyone has the appetite for that level of self-scrutiny. Careful, though. Infinite recursion is seductive. At some point, you stop analyzing the foundations and start living from them. Otherwise, you end up building a perfect moral blueprint for a house you never step into.
Infinite recursion is seductive. Okay, I'm gonna listen to this now.
Here at Rally Iberia, it looks as though tyre choice will be tricky this week as the weather conditions don't look like they'll be terribly consistent this time out. To the standings then, and as this is the first event, the table is a clean slate for this championship. I'm sure all the teams will be eyeing up the chance for some real success and to get some early points on the board.
I've been stuck thinking about Season 1 of True Detective for more than a decade. Part of it is the incredible on-location cinematography, which I covered pretty extensively in my previous video titled The Scene That Changed Television Forever. The other part is the depth there was, both in story and character development. I find myself always circling back to that first season just to spend more time in that world. Something deep within me is still drawn to the strangeness of it after all these years. But today I wanted to get deep into the trenches with just one of the characters from that season, Detective Rustin Cole. Then we'll dive into Rust's philosophy, where we'll briefly cover a few fun philosophers and philosophies along the way, all while touching on how each piece funnels back into Rust Cole's overarching philosophy. There it is. Now, I say briefly because each of the upcoming sections could easily be made into multiple hour-long videos diving into their respective topics. But for the sake of time and all of our sanity, if you're fortunate enough to still have some of that, I'm going to do my best to keep it tight. Because ultimately, the theme of the day is Rust Cole's philosophy. Not this guy's, or this guy's, or this guy's, or even this guy's, and especially not this guy's. After discussing Rust's philosophy a bit, we'll go over how this beloved character even came into existence and where True Detective writer and creator Nick Pizzolatto pulled from to develop such an iconic fella. And then we'll close out with some post-philosophical thoughts and y'all can go on your merry little way. So pour yourself a glass of Jameson.
I don't drink.
Or not. Either way, strap in for the philosophy of Rust Cole. Meet Rust. Detective Rustin Spencer Cole, nicknamed the Taxman by his fellow officers. Reason being, while other detectives took notes about an investigation on their little notepads, Rust used a large ledger to jot down any details he might observe into it, giving him the appearance of a taxman who goes door to door, with a book full of debts owed, looking to collect. An appearance that wasn't too far from reality. Rust also had another nickname. He spent some time undercover riding with the biker gang known as the Iron Crusaders. During that time, Rust had the nickname Crash, which, according to a semi-reliable online source, his full nickname was actually Car Crash. Regardless, Crash was the name that stuck, due to his tolerance for risk-taking and an equally high capacity for violence and getting his hands dirty. Both nicknames do a great job of summarizing Rust. A bit of yin and yang, if you will. He has a willingness to attack unbothered by the potential consequences to himself, making the name Crash suitable, regardless of whether he's undercover or not. But he rarely does so without making sure his actions serve a purpose, something he's seemingly always aware of thanks to his fine note-taking. Because
And you never know what the thing's gonna be, do you?
Rust's obsession over a case and attention to detail makes his Taxman nickname equally fitting. Rust is patient and he is focused, while not afraid to risk his well-being for what he deems righteous and just. The Rust we meet has a strong moral compass, or in the words of the late Steve Harvey,
his moral barometer.
and seems to sustain it throughout, regardless of the ups and downs he has between 1995 and 2012, the years we saw Rust on screen. But was he always like this? What happened before our introduction to Rust in 95? Rust was born November 6, 1964 in South Texas. His parents divorced sometime later and his father, Travis Cole, took young Rust up to Alaska, where he spent most of his childhood. Rust's dad was a survivalist and a Vietnam veteran. Not much is mentioned regarding Rust's dad, but as Rust got older, he claimed to grow tired of the cold climate and conditions of Alaska, and
I headed back to South Texas because all I could remember was at least it never got cold.
something Rust's father, Travis, seemingly held against him, considering it a lack of loyalty for leaving Papa Cole behind.
My old man always made like I let him down that way.
Upon returning to Texas, young Rust found himself working as a detective in the robbery squad for the Houston Police Department. He also snagged himself a wife named Claire, and the two of them had a daughter named Sophia. The good times of yesteryear were cut short sometime in the mid to late 80s. Sophia was lost to a car accident when she was only 2 years old. Rust and Claire's marriage couldn't survive the loss of their child, and not long after, the two divorced. Moving forward, there will be very little brightness about Rust's character or his philosophy. In fact, I would argue that the only big bright part about Rust's timeline was in fact the moments he had with Claire and his daughter Sophia. Prior to their existence in his life, the small bits that we get about Rust's past involve a pretty dark childhood and a potentially delusional, semi-paranoid, survivalist father as the primary mentor. There's a strong probability Rust has always been headed the direction he ended up, but the moments with his wife and child provided a light-hearted detour. After the loss of his daughter, followed by the divorce of his wife, Rust no longer had a reason to remain tethered to reality. He immediately switches from the robbery unit to narcotics in his department. He also dramatically ramps up his drinking and starts using a wide variety of drugs. My man. One day, while working narcotics, Rust comes across a tweaker injecting meth into his infant daughter and snaps, killing the tweaker. As a result, he's given a choice: prison time or go deep undercover as a narcotics detective in a high-intensity drug trafficking area. Rust goes on to do 4 years undercover, when the standard is generally never more than 11 months. The only reason his 4-year stint undercover ended was because of a shootout gone wrong that happened when he was riding his crash at the Iron Crusaders. The shootout resulted in the death of 3 cartel members and Rust ending up with multiple gunshot wounds. With the Iron Crusaders assuming he was dead, he was removed from undercover and given the opportunity to retire with a full pension. Instead, Rust refused and requested being transferred to a homicide unit, landing him in the state of Louisiana. The benefit of being undercover for Rust was that he was working 24/7. Work-life balance was a non-issue for Rust, as he was trying to avoid the whole life thing. No longer undercover, Rust has no life beyond his work. So now, being a homicide detective for the state of Louisiana is his only focus. With an apartment that has next to nothing in it beyond a bed on the floor, a tiny mirror, books on criminology, and a cross so that he can
Contemplate the moment in the garden. The idea of allowing your own crucifixion.
Rust also has what's called synesthesia and deals with hallucinogenic persisting perception disorder, or HPPD, which have the potential to cause extremely unique side effects when occurring simultaneously. There are two known types of synesthesia. Projective synesthesia, the more widely understood version of the two, which leads to seeing colors, forms, or shapes when stimulated. And the other is associative synesthesia, which leads to feeling a very strong and involuntary connection between the stimulus and the sense that it triggers. I would argue that Rust Cole deals with both. This coupled with HPPD, and Rust is in for a good old-fashioned psychedelically unique time. I think his synesthesia and HPPD are worth mentioning because while they aren't philosophical traits in nature, I think it adds to the overall picture of Rust Cole's philosophy, even beyond his unique life experience. In layman's terms, if he's seeing shit different and hearing shit different, he'd probably be philosophing different too. Rust also tends to go back and forth on the whole sobriety thing, something that appears to be dependent upon whether he's in a stage of taxingly focused self-control or a state of crash out and letting everything loose. Okay, now that we're all caught up to 1995 and beyond, after a brief overview of who our boy Rusty Rust is, let's move on to the meat and potatoes. Rust's philosophy.
I'd consider myself a realist, all right, but in philosophical terms, I'm what's called a pessimist.
So Rust self-identifies as a pessimist. Let's take a look at what that means. First, it's important to make a distinction between a pessimistic attitude and philosophical pessimism. A person with a pessimistic attitude generally views life as an overall bad time, defined as a tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe that the worst will happen, a lack of hope or confidence in the future. Real glass half empty types, Debbie Downers if you will. Pessimism as an attitude has been known to parallel the study of depression, and historically it's been associated with melancholy or melancholia, not to be confused with the great Lars von Trier film. Nope, not that one. Oh god, not that one either. There we go. That's the one. But today, I'm not here to talk to you about melancholia or pessimism as an attitude. Instead, I want to focus on philosophical pessimism. Small warning, anytime I mention pessimism moving forward, I'll be referring to philosophical pessimism. As we heard before, Rust describes himself in philosophical terms as being a pessimist. So what does that mean?
It means I'm bad at parties.
Alright, I guess that covers it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Nah, just kidding. I've got a little more sweet philosophical nectar for you. But first, let's set a baseline. I'm going to give an oversimplified definition for the philosophy of pessimism, just so there's something to go back to as we get deeper into the weeds of this thing. If you or I start to get disoriented or confused, returning to this can be a useful tool. Philosophical pessimism argues that life and existence are hopeless, coupled with a vague, general opinion that pain and evil predominate in the world. Suffering outweighs pleasure, happiness is fleeting, and existence is meaningless. Okay, there you go. Like I said, simple. Think of this as an anchor. If you're simple-minded like me, then it helps to have a simple spot to go back to when getting bamboozled by
$10 words
and dense text that's sometimes tough to deal with in philosophy. That said, know that this isn't a hard definition, and there's a wide variety of pessimistic philosophers that would argue for or against every word in that definition I just gave you. Oh, and there's no such thing as anchors in philosophy. They're meaningless. Alright, you feeling better? You ready? Get your helmet on, because you'll need it. I know I'll be wearing mine. And this next part will be the girthiest section of the video, so buckle up. Alright, enough background dribble. Let's get into it. Early pessimism. Slave, listen to me. Here I am, master. Here I am. What then is good? To have my neck and yours broken, or to be thrown into the river? Is that good? Who is so tall as to ascend to heaven? Who is so broad as to encompass the entire world? O slave, I will kill you and send you first. Yes, but Master would certainly not survive me for 3 days. Buddhism. What if I told you it was a few filthy religions that were responsible for providing the world with the initial bump in pessimism? What are some of the religions that first come to mind? I'm betting most folks' first thought is not Buddhism. I know it wasn't for me. I kind of assumed the whole enlightenment thing equated to bliss. But as it turns out, in ancient times, you had the Buddha cruising around telling everyone life is suffering. Out here talking about dukkha, also known as suffering, pain, and unease. This so-called suffering is caused by desire, and liberation or nirvana means freedom from desire, freedom from rebirth, and freedom from suffering. So what does this mean? That pessimism is needed to achieve enlightenment? For context, this was happening around the 6th and 5th century BC, making the Buddha one of the first to become documented indulging in some pessimism. Reminder that I said BC as opposed to AD. Basically, this was happening a long ass time ago. But then we've got Judaism and Christianity. The Jews' Ketuvim and the Christians' heavy-handed Old Testament have some pessimism within the Ecclesiastes authored by King Solomon. Really quickly, I want to mention there's been debate amongst scholars on the exact timeline, but King Solomon likely wrote Ecclesiastes somewhere between 450 and 180 BC. In it, he writes of the meaninglessness life has to offer. In the King James Version of the Bible, Ecclesiastes 7:15 says, "All things have I seen in the days of my vanity. There is a just man that perisheth in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man that prolongeth in his life in wickedness." For a little clarity, the New International Version says, "In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these, the righteous perishing in their righteousness, and the wicked living long in their wickedness." In the King James Version, chapter 1, verse 2 says, "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity." In the NIV version, saying meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. You get the picture. For both Christianity and Judaism, the purpose of most of this is to convey that life is meaningless if you're living a life without God. A lifestyle choice Rust Cole tends to look pretty aggressively down upon.
Religion is a language virus that rewrites pathways in the brain, dulls critical thinking.
Next in the ethos of early pessimism, we have what's called Gnosticism. Not to be confused with agnosticism, Gnosticism is similar in that it was a belief system about knowledge, but opposite in that agnosticism is a belief in the knowledge of no God or elevated reality, and Gnosticism is the knowledge of God, a spiritual knowledge of God, and of all things holy. These guys were heavy hitters, around primarily between 1 to 3 AD, believed themselves to be the only true Christians. Pretty typical of every subsect of Christianity though, eh? But they were considered heretics by most of the Christian churches at the time. Gnostics believed in spiritual growth. They believed that the body was a prison for the soul, and that Earth was a hell that needed to be escaped. The cosmos being a result of a failed work, and all that exists for us in this world is to suffer and ultimately die. But those that desperately pursue spiritual growth in preparation for an afterlife are amongst the chosen to return to the heavens with whence they came. Those who do not are destined for an undisclosed number of reincarnations aimlessly wandering this hell on earth. Now that's a spicy early stage pessimism right there, with a little dash of cosmos, but once again, existence is rationalized by the pursuit of God. Seems to be very clutch when you need a reason to not say bon voyage to the whole life thing. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead 15 or so centuries, get us up to speed. I'd love to give you a more detailed outline leading up to our boy Rust, but if I do that, we'll be here for 3 days. I could be persuaded to go a little deeper some other time though, but all I want to do today is to set a solid foundation for where Rust's self-proclaimed philosophy is derived from. Plus, persuasion might not work as everything is in fact meaningless. Though we are skipping ahead, I'm going to mention a few names that deserve acknowledgement when discussing pessimism. A couple, maybe even a few of them, I'll include some level of elaboration, before popping out on the other side and back into Rust's deep pit of despair he calls life. To kick things off, we have the absolute legend of ancient Greece, Hagizis of Syri. who wrote the lighthearted book called Death by Starvation around 290 BC that may or may not have encouraged people to consider that death might be a little more enticing than life, earning him the nickname Death Persuader. Real Thomas Ligotti vibes if you ask me, a fellow we'll be talking about a little later in this video. Then we have Boethius, bringing in the Middle Ages. Pessimism is out of fashion and now considered contradictory by Christianity's whole divine hope thing. Next, we have the Renaissance to early modern era, which included the likes of Michel de Montaigne, Blaise Pascal, Thomas Hobbes, not to be confused with Calvin and Hobbes, and Jonathan Swift, who actually wrote Gulliver's Travels. Now we hit the 18th and early 19th centuries, an era of optimism. But the line of pessimism was held strong against such foolish ignorance with guys like Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Giacomo Leopardi. But it wasn't until the second half of the 19th century that pessimism finally hit its stride. A German fella named Arthur Schopenhauer put his philosophical pessimism into a well-structured, presentable form, separating it from its religious roots. Ironically, later in life, Schopenhauer would express quite a bit of interest in Buddhism's idea of enlightenment. With heavy influence from Immanuel Kant, old Arthur Schopenhauer would reshape some of Kant's ideas on reality. Kant believed we were never able to access reality because our minds reshape it, altering its appearance. Schopenhauer's unique little spin was that he swapped out reality with will. Reality is a manifestation of will, and if we aren't able to access reality, it's because our filthy, complex minds are getting in the way. Now, I can't go too far down this rabbit hole because it'll lead us too far off the path. I just can't. But I'd recommend doing additional exploring of your own on these guys if you're digging early pessimism. Obviously, after you're done watching this video. Modern pessimism. Human life must be some kind of mistake. The truth of this will be sufficiently obvious if we only remember that man is a compound of needs and necessities hard to satisfy, and that even when they are satisfied, all he obtains is a state of painlessness, where nothing remains to him but abandonment to boredom. This is direct proof that existence has no real value in itself. For what is boredom but the feeling of the emptiness of life? If life, the craving for which is the very essence of our being, were possessed of any positive intrinsic value, there would be no such thing as boredom at all. Mere existence would satisfy us in itself, and we should want for nothing. Arthur Schopenhauer, Studies in Pessimism, the Essays.
I think human consciousness is a tragic misstep in evolution.
Schopenhauer would say stuff like, a pessimist is an optimist in full possession of the facts, and life is a constant process of dying, and life is a constant oscillation between the desire to have and the boredom of possessing. On the surface it feels pretty grim, and maybe it is, but old Schopenhauer was the first to clarify what a pessimistic philosophy looked like when you stripped away religion and passive commentary. After Schopenhauer, pessimism started popping off, with dudes like Julius Bonson, Philip Mainlander, Edward von Hartmann, and Friedrich Nietzsche, who we'll be touching on more deeply later. But first, let's talk about a fellow named Albert Camus, who wrote an essay titled The Myth of Sisyphus, which used the punishment of the Greek king Sisyphus of endlessly pushing a huge boulder up a steep hill in the afterlife as a metaphor for the human condition, with Camus stating, "The struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy." In another one of Camus' articles, titled Renaissance, Rebellion, and Death, he wrote, "The idea that a pessimistic philosophy is necessarily one of discouragement is a puerile idea, but one that needs too long a refutation."
What the hell is even that?
You might be asking. What he's saying is only a child would think of pessimism as a philosophy of discouragement, but explaining why it's childish to think that way takes too long to explain over and over again to weak-minded Neanderthals like your mom. Sorry that last part was rude, but it needed to be said. Regardless, Albert Camus coming in with some real solid glass half empty thinking. Uh-oh, does that mean viewing the glass half empty is not necessarily a bad thing? Rust versus pessimism. Alright, so you've been hammered with a lot of the backstory to philosophical pessimism, so let's circle back to Rust. Throughout the show, he's experiencing a lot of back and forths regarding will and how he experiences reality, even beyond his blend of HPPD and synesthesia. often bouncing between drinking and not drinking depending on the circumstances. Drinking when dealing with forced reflection, like the memory of his daughter, or performative, like devolving into Crash, or when confronted with self, like indulging in lust with his partner's wife, or the emptiness within when he's stripped away from work, like after he left the police force. Meanwhile, not drinking when he's focused and moving with purpose, like when he's active duty and kicks things off on the door lane case. As long as he's pushing the boulder up the hill, he seems to be somewhat stable. It's when the boulder rolls its way back down again that Rust tends to lose control. So when we meet Rust in 1995, he's pretty deep into his pessimistic journey, but sometimes walks the line of nihilism, which can be defined as everything is meaningless. Imagine summarizing an entire philosophy in 3 words. Well, I just did. I'd be a little worried about nihilists coming for me, except they ain't.
Believes in nothing.
He believes in nothing, Lebowski, nothing.
So 95 Rust sits pretty firmly in pessimism, but dabbles a bit in feelings of nihilism with things like life is meaningless and by suggesting that our existence is an accident and we shouldn't exist at all. Rust says he tells himself his purpose is to
Bear witness.
but mentions that,
The real answer is that it's obviously my programming.
and he lacks the constitution to provide himself with the more permanent solution of non-existence. Or it would be permanent if, when the language is stripped down a bit and we look at Rust's actions, he sits pretty comfortably on his pessimistic throne. 2002 Rust actually seems to have a strong sense of purpose and finds himself more involved in life. He finds himself in a relationship, though he later ends it, and working as a fairly renowned interrogator throughout the local area. But all of this comes crashing down when Rust continues drinking and gives in to worldly urges with his partner Marty's wife. Schopenhauer has another quote that I feel fits well here. No rose without a thorn, but many a thorn without a rose. Rust had a brief moment with a rose and was quickly thrown back in the thorns, reminding him of the purposelessness of indulging in pleasure. Rust gives in to his perceived nature, quits his job, moves to Alaska, and becomes a fisherman, where he can spend his days drinking and fishing, counting down the clock. Initiate Rust covering himself in a very large nihilistic blanket sequence. Rust remains wrapped in this blanket for 8 or so years. That is until his deeper calling returns. In 2010, when he returns to Louisiana, he's given a purpose again. Likely the only purpose that's been keeping him alive. A debt he felt needed repayment. Even though he mentions after the debt is paid, he'll likely be checking out permanently, which would be concerning if, when we arrive at Rust in 2012, he's like a hodgepodge of what we've seen before. Still disciplined and focused, extensive notes, meticulous attention to detail, and seemingly photographic memory around every aspect of the case, even 20 years later. Alternatively, Rust is still completely alienated from society, more so than ever, and now has leaned into his self-indulgence in respect to his drinking, never without a drink in hand, either in his shed or at the bar he's working at. Yin and Yang. Crash and the Taxman. Rust might front with some nihilistic tendencies in how he speaks, but still finds himself more aligned with pessimism. Most of his beliefs throughout align with pessimism's central themes of life is not worth living, the bad prevails over the good, and non-existence is preferable to existence, but still showing up for life, programming or not. Speaking of non-existence being superior to existence, that feeds right into our next philosophy, known as anti-natalism. Procreation is unethical and unjustifiable due to the uncertainties and suffering that coincides with existence. This one is pretty simple. Russ suggests that the
Honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming, stop reproducing, walk hand in hand into extinction.
basically life sucks and it's just rude to make babies. It's completely unethical to inflict that level of suffering on someone else, especially when they have no choice in the matter. A couple of years ago, there was a woman from New Jersey who joked that she sued her parents for making her and received $5,000 a month for her troubles, aka being alive. Although her troubles with life might have less to do with being alive and more to do with living in New Jersey. Come on, I'm joking. Shout out to you, New Jersey. Thank you so much for The Sopranos and Pauly D. For some background, antinatalism actually ties back to pessimism and was made popular by two pessimists. One, Emile Cioran, was a pretty strong advocate against the whole existing thing, but also was pretty against ending your life, though not for the reason you might suspect. Emile claimed it wasn't worth removing yourself from this life because life and death are equal in meaninglessness, but ending it yourself isn't worth it because you're inevitably doing it too late, suggesting that non-birth is the only reasonable time to slip into non-existence. The other anti-baby making pessimist I want to mention is still alive and semi-well. He goes by the name David Benatar. David Benatar came up with what is now known as Benatar's asymmetry argument for antinatalism, which he introduced in his book Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence. In it, he covers the positives and negatives when comparing existence versus non-existence. Here's a little graph for your viewing pleasure. Now, to better understand this, I had to dig up one of my old school books from another lifetime ago, and after flipping through it, I was reminded of how simple-minded I really am, and barely understood this when I was actually taking the class. It also did not seem to provide any assistance in better explaining what you're seeing in this graph. Well, whatever. Benatar's argument is that the presence of pain is bad and the presence of pleasure is good. That said, the absence of pain is also good, even if that absence is a result of non-existence. Furthermore, the absence of pleasure is not bad unless there's someone for whom the absence is a deprivation. This argument ties into procreation, because if existence provides both good and bad experiences, pleasure and pain, all the while not coming into existence results in neither pain nor pleasure. The absence of pain is good, the absence of pleasure is not bad, and so the ethical choice leans towards non-procreation. Rust versus antinatalism. Rust's entire existence has revolved primarily around pain, with very rare moments of any pleasure, most of which were stripped away not long after being experienced, resulting in Scenario B looking pretty damn good to a guy like Rust, hence the underlying antinatalism he seems so fond of. Psst, babe, wake up. This dork is about to try to explain one of the most complicated philosophers of all time in just a few minutes. Babe, it gets worse. He's also going to include how it ties into one of the most beloved characters to ever exist on television. I know baby's cooked. Time is a flat circle. I come again with this sun, with this earth, with this eagle, with this serpent, not to a new life or a better life or a similar life. I come back eternally for this same, self-same life. Thus spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche.
Time is a flat circle.
I said, Nietzsche, shut the fuck up. This is a world where nothing is solved. And someone once told me time is a flat circle.
Who the fuck is
Nietzsche?
You might be asking? Well, that video alone would take a decade to make and 6 days to watch. So instead, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophical outlook and why Rust associated him with time is a flat circle after that hillbilly wanker said it. But for the sake of context, I'd still like to shed a tiny light on who the fellow was. A little backstory, if you will. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was born in Prussia in 1844, a German philosopher who managed to crank out pretty profound bits of work starting at a very early age. He wrote a litany of books and essays like Beyond Good and Evil, which is generally considered the best starting point when reading Nietzsche, The Gay Science, which is extra spooky for religious folks, but not for the reason you'd think. The Gay Science is the book in which Nietzsche famously states God is dead, and he criticizes traditional morality and religion. Nietzsche also wrote The Antichrist. No, not you again. Damn it, Lars. That's the one. In which he introduces the concept of willpower, which viewed power as a driving force to grow and develop, striving for one's fullest potential despite suffering. For a period, Nietzsche's outlook heavily aligned with our boy Schopenhauer, but this book pretty definitively burns that bridge. Schopenhauer was pretty big on compassion as it allowed for shared suffering, leading to a strong
Moral barometer.
Meanwhile, Nietzsche felt compassion was cool but didn't contribute to morality in any way, and actually made you weaker, denying that sweet, succulent will to power. Nietzsche also targets a variety of religions in the Antichrist. Spoiler alert, in case the title didn't give it away already, claiming Christianity makes men soft due to its peaceful nature. He also criticized Buddha, stating that both Christianity and Buddhism are nihilistic in nature. But of the two, quote, Buddhism is 100 times as realistic as Christianity, end quote. Nietzsche believed Buddhism's realism is what made it more palatable to Christianity. Its application to reality using philosophy rather than a God concept, and the struggle with suffering rather than the struggle with sin. Unfortunately, he was plagued by pretty heavy health issues in the last 10 years of his life or so. His health issues grew worse and he struggled with his grasp on the societal standard of reality, which is just a fun way of saying his body gave out and his mind was lost. Friedrich Nietzsche died in the German Empire in 1900 at the age of 55. But like I said, I'm not here to discuss Nietzsche. Instead, we'll be discussing the connection between time is a flat circle, how it aligns with Nietzsche, the evolution of Rusty Cole with this statement, and what it all means. Nietzsche had a concept he called eternal recurrence. He briefly mentions it in his book The Gay Science, but dives in deep on it in his philosophical fiction novel Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a book for all and none. As a work of fiction, the character Zarathustra is grappling with the terror of an eternal return, being stuck in the endless cycle of living the same life
Again. And again. And again.
Zarathustra distracts himself with other things to avoid confronting this reality, distracting himself with things like letting saints know God is dead. And there's a new type of human, a superhuman. You might even call him a Superman, known as the Übermensch. Oddly similar to a young Detective Rust who is highly critical of the preacher.
Transference of fear and self-loathing to an authoritarian vessel. He absorbs their dread with his narrative. Because of this, he's effective in proportion to the amount of certainty he can project. Certain linguistic anthropologists think that religion is a language virus that rewrites pathways in the brain, dulls critical thinking.
Rust is also quick to dismiss the mention of time as a flat circle when it's initially offered up. Granted, the messenger delivering the flat circle bit probably isn't the type of dude anyone should be looking to for philosophical insight. But fast forward 15 years later and Rust is a hardened alcoholic who's been swimming around in darkness and depravity and now finds himself quoting the same man he dismissed.
Someone once told me time is a flat circle.
Rust versus Nietzsche versus nihilism. There's some debate that surrounds whether Nietzsche was a nihilist or not, which is quite similar to debates I've seen regarding Rust and where he lands philosophically. I don't think either of them are. No matter how much Rust tries to convince us that he wakes up in the morning and shows up for life due to programming and a lack of constitution for driving his car off a cliff, he is still willing to go to any lengths to find the truth and serve up justice. Old Fred Nietzsche, as it turns out, isn't much of a nihilist either. Remember that in-depth definition I gave you on nihilism earlier? Nihilism.
Which can be defined as everything is meaningless. Imagine summarizing an entire philosophy in 3 words. Well, I just did. I'd be a little worried about nihilists coming for me, except they...
Well, one of Nietzsche's more famous quotes is, "To live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." That certainly sounds like meaning to me. Both seem to be comfortable exploring deep levels of meaninglessness, but neither of them ever really give in. Now, I don't want to dwell on this point for too long because even Nick Pizzolatto has flat out said Rust Cole is not a nihilist. Nick saying, quote, "I think if you watch the show, it's obvious Cole does not believe in the stuff he says. Anytime somebody called Cole a nihilist, I was like, what do you think a nihilist is? Because far from nothing meaning anything to Cole, if anything, the world seemed overwrought with meaning to Cole. And for a nihilist, he sure does care about doing the right thing and serving justice. When he complains to the sky, who does he think he's complaining to?" So there were always these contradictions in him. And I always thought it was a real bummer that certain faction of people who thought this guy is laying down truth. I was always like, well, if you've ever been in a freshman dorm room, you might hear the same sorts of stuff. End quote. Who does this Nick Pizzolatto guy think he is, some of you might be saying? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Nick Pizzolatto. The Birth of Rust Cohle. Nick Pizzolatto was the creator and writer of True Detective's first season, and ultimately manifested our favorite fictional sad boy, Rust Cohle, into existence. But Ian, Nick didn't manifest Rust from nothingness, did he? You might be asking. Excellent question, new friend. You're absolutely right. But where did he get his idea for the world's finest detective? Well, fortunately for us, Nick has been pretty open about some of the influences beyond the previously mentioned philosophical ones we've already covered. In fact, there's two specific, more modern influences that greatly impacted the development of Rust Cohle. The first one we're going to cover is Thomas Ligotti and the Conspiracy Against the Human Race. In 2010, just 4 years before the initial release of True Detective, the horror writer Thomas Ligotti released a philosophical book titled The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, in which he discusses why consciousness
should not exist
and was actually a big boo-boo. Ligotti also discusses his theory that self is an illusion, free will is made up, and is actually just the equivalent to a puppet having an awareness of its strings. How being alive is a nightmare from which we cannot wake. The universe is unwelcoming and indifferent to our existence. Then finally tackling everyone's favorite topic of antinatalism and providing us with a sales pitch for non-existence. Some of that sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? Let's play a little game. Can you guess which of these were said by Thomas Ligotti and which were said by Rust Cohle? We'll start with an easy one.
Cue the Jeopardy music.
Ba, 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 ba. Alright, and the answers are... Wow, great work, but the warm-up round is now over. No cheating on these next ones, or you'll need to report to the principal's office for potential denial of programming and weekend suspension.
Cue the Jeopardy music again.
Boom, boom. If you got all those correct, congratulations! You win nothing and life is still hopeless. Thomas Ligotti was born in 1953, and at the time of this video is still alive today. In his philosophical nonfiction novel, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, he dives into pessimism, antinatalism, and a little nihilism. Ligotti offers up the perspective that aliveness ain't so good, and the more that a person becomes consciously aware of how meaningless, and as he calls it, malignantly useless everything is, the worse it gets. Ligotti claims that if each person truly understood these things, they'd be down for species-wide extinction. And he does a pretty good job of presenting his Dark Times of Ridgemont High case. But even with this strong case, there's something worth noting. Thomas Ligotti has what's known as anhedonia, which can have an incredible effect on motivation and, more importantly, reduce and in some cases eliminate the ability to experience pleasure. This is worth noting because I would imagine a person who is unable to experience pleasure is likely going to have a pretty grim outlook on life. Fortunately for us, Ligotti's motivation was strong enough to provide us with some pretty sweet horror stories, poems, and a philosophical endeavor. And if you're a fan of Rust Cohle, which I'd imagine you are if you made it through the video this far, I'd recommend you absolutely check out some of his work. But knowing about Thomas Ligotti's case of anhedonia adds an additional layer to how he might have come to the conclusion that everything is malignantly useless. You know, similar to how Rust's synesthesia might have a small effect on how he experiences the world. It's always worth considering someone's internal chemistry and how it affects their philosophy. A few years ago, I discovered Ligotti's work while cruising around the internet looking for more Rust Cohle after yet another rewatch of True Detective Season 1. During that time, I'd also seen some articles about Nick Pizzolatto using Thomas Ligotti's work to plagiarize Rust's character, and while the similarities are undeniable, here's what I'll say about that. While Rust's character is clearly influenced and in some moments nearly identical to Thomas Ligotti's Conspiracy Against the Human Race, Rust would not exist without the entirety of the story that surrounds him. Though some lines of dialogue match closely and the belief systems are similar, there are clearly other influences on his character's development, many of which we've covered in this video. So any criticism regarding Pizzolatto's usage of Ligotti's work being a ripoff or plagiarized is unfounded. Anecdotally, I'm grateful to True Detective for introducing me to Thomas Ligotti because there's a low chance I would have discovered him otherwise. You know who else I wouldn't have discovered if it hadn't been for my endless curiosity regarding Rust Cohle? Another contributor to Casa della Rust Cohle philosophy, a professor, writer, and cosmic pessimist who goes by the name Eugene Thacker and wrote the book titled In the Dust of This Planet.
In the dust.
Now this guy was a curveball. I'd known about Thomas Ligotti for a long time, but it wasn't until I randomly stumbled upon this podcast while working on this video that I discovered Eugene Thacker's In the Dust of This Planet. Unbeknownst to me, in a 2014 Wall Street Journal article, Nick Pizzolatto actually mentions Thacker's In the Dust of This Planet, along with mentioning Ligotti in the same article, stating in the interview that Thacker's book released in 2011 had a very direct influence on Rust's overall worldview. In the Dust of This Planet dives into what Thacker calls philosophical horror, referencing H.P. Lovecraft and the legendary John Carpenter. He discusses what he calls the unthinkable world and how horror reveals the limits of human understanding. Things like monsters, black holes, voids, and plagues provide insight to things that can't be fully grasped. He also covers things like dark mysticism, cosmic pessimism, and a dash of eroticism and the occult. So yeah, Eugene Thacker is basically like Rust Cohle's cousin. What's really cool is Eugene Thacker is still very much alive and cranking out new material. I really like his point of view on what he likes to call horror philosophy and cosmic pessimism. He also talks a lot about black metal, which I think is pretty sweet. If this is the first time you're hearing about Thomas Ligotti or Eugene Thacker, I'd highly recommend checking out both of them. They both offer some pretty bleak philosophies about the world, most of which are shared by Rust Cohle. So if you're looking for a little more Rust, it's a great place to do some exploring. But wait, something happens to Rust Cohle near the end of the season. Their shared philosophies seem to part ways just before the conclusion. Now, I know it was a few days ago, but hopefully you remember earlier when we discussed how Nietzsche fit in with Rust Cohle and the whole time is a flat circle thing. And if you recall, we covered Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence using the character Zarathustra from his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Well, there was one tiny detail about Zarathustra's story I neglected to mention. In the story, Zarathustra spends some time questing around, but during his travels he avoids his darkest thoughts. At some point, Zarathustra is confronted by the horrifying realization that if time is infinite, then life endlessly repeats itself. What is he to do after all those years of searching for some reprieve, only to discover the search might never end? Well, the outcome of Zarathustra's quest turns out to be as simple as living a life that's worth living, so that when it is repeated, it is worth living. Again and again.
And again.
If life is like Groundhog Day, give it purpose, something to make it worth a damn. Upon this realization, Zarathustra's fear is removed and replaced with hope. So when Rust barely survives, he has a moment in which he feels his daughter's unconditional love. This moment gives Rust a feeling of hope, because before Rust believed that
The world needs bad men. We keep the other bad men from the door.
the good in this world is thinning by the day, with the bad overtaking quickly. But after this experience of his, something changes for Rust. It doesn't shift his perspective away from being
In philosophical terms, I'm what's called a pessimist.
he still believes the bad outweighs the good, but what it does do is shift him away from believing the bad is winning. Rust feels hope that maybe there's enough good to make the next cycle through, the next pass around the flat circle, worth living for. And just like Buddha finding enlightenment through the suffering, or Sisyphus finding purpose in pushing the rock, or even Ouroboros eating his own tail for eternity, Rust finds purpose in that he no longer believes that the world is only dark, because God might still be dead.
Once there is only dark. Yes, any light's winning.
Thank you so much for watching. This was my favorite deep dive to do so far. If you enjoyed watching the video, please let me know by hitting the like button, and make sure to subscribe for more videos I'll do in the future. Rust is a man full of contradictions and paradoxes, like many of us are. Throughout the season, saying outrageous things like,
I don't think that man can love.
Even though he'd absolutely loved his daughter when she was alive, he was reminded once again of that love after his near-death experience. But I think those characteristics are what attracted so many people to Rust and Cole in the first place. I honestly went into making this planning to dismantle the stereotype that Rust is a philosophical pessimist, and was surprised to discover that that was the only one of his philosophies that seemingly stayed true to the end. But worse yet, now I'm wondering if I'm a philosophical pessimist. What do you think? Are you a pessimist now? Or are you one of those silly glass half full types? Let me know in a comment down below. Please consider giving Season 1 of True Detective a rewatch and maybe crack open one of Eugene Thacker, Thomas Ligotti, or Arthur Schopenhauer's books for a little read. And if you're feeling exceptionally dangerous, why not do a little dabbling in some of Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche's works? In the meantime, this is Ian, signing off. Climax.
There is something in between the trees. Limbs, horns, a body, a figure. Or is it just more forest? Maybe you're fooled by the limits of your visual perception. You'll never know until it moves. This is one of the many reasons why the woods are my favorite horror setting. And no other movie in recent memory did it as well as The Ritual. A group of men unintentionally setting foot into an ancient forest still ruled by the old gods, untouched by monotheism, technology, and civilization. A place where the oldest type of relationship still determines everything, the relationship between the prey and the predator. So much has been said about the film, because it's exceptional. It's a shame that there aren't more movies like it. No One Gets Out Alive from 2021 changes the Norse gods for Aztec gods, and takes place in the same universe. But it doesn't come anywhere near close to the quality of the horror poster child. Maybe it's because I'm sick of haunted houses, even if the haunting is a result of a Mesoamerican cum jar. There is, however, more ritual, because the movie is based on a book by Adam Neville. And not only that the book has significantly more content, its underlying themes are very different as well. The horror is slower and more dreamy, but obviously not everyone likes to read, and that's why I'm here, to give you a summary and talk about my personal takes on The Ritual, because the book is similar but very different in key aspects. This is apparent as soon as the first page. A group of 4 friends stumbles upon a corpse of an animal in a forest. It was impaled on branches of trees, far above human reach. Its insides revealed to the world, displayed by something proud of its work. Unlike in the movie, the friend group here is 4 people, and always has been. This is their reunion trip. They met each other in college, but as time went on, they grew apart. The dynamic within the friend group is the most important theme of the first part of the book. You have Luke, the main protagonist, who is the only one that doesn't have a wife or a career. He constantly switches his jobs and relationships. To people around him, it seems like he never grew up. This frustrates Luke deeply. Why can't other people accept his life choices? Why should he get married, have kids, and then off his job like most other men his age? Dom and Phil were Luke's good friends in college, but that is no longer the case. They almost never talk to Luke. It's almost as if they lived in a different universe. As far as he knows, both Dom and Phil are rich and have functional families, but he never even gets invited for a visit. He's the only one who still lives in an apartment in London. The others have houses in their respective hometowns. Conversation with the two is impossible for Luke, because any topic he tries to talk about turns into an eye roll or a joke. What he says is always funny and silly. They see him as someone stuck in his early 20s. The disgust goes both ways. He sees how Dom and Phil fell victim to a stale life. Both of them are fat and out of shape. I can't help myself but share some of the beautiful sentences English literature is known for. Stretching his blue work shirt taut, Phil's hairy white stomach had been visible, and his arse looked bulbous enough to suggest the feminine. The last of our characters, Hutch, is the glue that keeps them together. He is the only one who keeps in frequent contact with Luke. He still has an active lifestyle. He's a scuba diver and a mountain biker. But at the same time, he is happily married. He is the type of person with a lot of emotional intelligence and tries to make Luke not feel left out. The 4 Englishmen agreed that their reunion trip will take the form of a hike through northern Sweden. However, it's apparent that only Hutch and Luke are physically fit enough have to do something like this. Even worse, Phil has a problem with blisters on his feet and Dom twisted his knee. The weather is terrible as well. It rains constantly. Luke is angry at Dom and Phil for not preparing for the trip. He looked forward to this for a whole year and scrambled to gather the little money he had for the gear. But he keeps his anger to himself, a cigarette always in his mouth to calm him down. It once again falls on Hutch to make a compromise and keep the friend group together. He decides on a shortcut through the woods. It's a large virgin forest, but at its narrowest point, they should get to its other side by the evening. And so they go. The forest is pure and untouched. The trail that led them in slowly disappeared. After a while, they are welcomed into the woods by the above-mentioned dead animal. Here the first culture shock kicked for me. Since they are millennials, they start thinking about what sort of an animal would be capable of such strength. A zoomer would immediately take a photo and send it into the group chat. Anyway, after a slow crawl through the overgrown vegetation, they find a trail. It doesn't lead in the right direction, but at this point it's their best chance. And as evening sets in, they find a house. It's an abandoned shack, old but still standing. It's not the colorful Swedish stereotype. This one is dark and unwelcoming. Luke doesn't have a good feeling about it. He would rather continue and get out of the forest that day. But Phil and Dom are too tired to continue. He gets reminded that he doesn't have any injury, as if it was his fault for being fit. They break into the house, but Luke stays outside a bit longer to smoke. He can't help himself but to overanalyze the situation. It's that way he can't even hold a proper conversation with them, while it seems like the three can talk for hours among themselves. Almost as if they have been hanging out without him every weekend. It's those subtle things, like how Hutch shares a tent with Dom, almost as if they were as close as all of them were back in college. But the trip had been so wretched because he recognized so little of the others now, which made him wonder if he had ever really known them at all. 15 years was a long time, but part of him had still clung to the notion that they were his best friends. But he was truly on his own out here. They had nothing in common anymore. His thoughts are interrupted by a sound of wood being splintered behind him. He faces the forest but can't see anything. An echo passes away, as if something large was making its way away from the house, breaking the trees and vegetation on its way. He briefly imagined a terrific rage and strength, a terrible intent out there. Imagined it until he almost accepted it. Once he enters the house, he notices that the walls are decorated with horns, antlers and crucifixes. No one is willing to hear him out about the strange noises he heard, since there is a thunderstorm raging outside. And while he is sure that what he heard wasn't a thunder, he is more than happy to forget about it. They get back to talking and Luke is suddenly happy again. We'll see these mood swings a lot. That's how a lot of long-lasting friendships tend to be. In one moment you're questioning why are you even hanging out in the first place, and in the next moment you're back to being best friends. There is an attic and Phil decides to check what's up there. Just a couple seconds later he is rushing back down the stairs, almost falling. He freezes, unable to cope with what he saw. There was something in the dark, staring at him. They aren't able to get anything more out of him. Hutch assumes that it might be an animal, so he and Luke go up the stairs to investigate. The scene is vividly written. We get to see it through Luke's perspective. The emotions on Hutch's face as he takes the last steps and sees that there really is something up there. Just barely visible. Surrounded by darkness, there is an upright figure staring at the two from the back of the attic. They shine their lights onto it, revealing it sitting in a coffin of sorts. It's a goat, stuffed and in a kneeling position. Its lips have been turned back to reveal the teeth. Its arms are turned upwards, as if it was commanding the people before it to worship it. But what worries them the most are the hands. They are human. Someone mummified them and sewed them onto the goat. Hutch is sure of what he found. It's Baphomet, the goat of Mendes. As disturbing as it is, it poses no real danger. It's just another dead animal. So the four of them get to drinking a bottle of Jack they brought with them. They get to bantering, trying to forget about the thing in the attic and the forest. But Luke can't help himself. He needs to share his thoughts with the others. Apparently, we're all programmed at a primal level in the reptilian brain to fear the woods, but it's more than that. I felt since we entered this forest that this fear isn't unjustified. I had this freaky idea. Earlier, when we were upstairs. Luke knew the idea would be unwelcome to the ears of anyone still awake, but could not stop himself thinking out loud. If that thing upstairs was a representation of the thing that threw the carcass into the tree. Everyone has nightmares that night. Luke dreams about being impaled on tree branches, like that animal they've seen. Something large, tall and lanky, approaching him from the forest, accompanied by jackal-like sounds. When he wakes up, it takes him a while to remember that he is a person, not cattle to be mutilated. Once he comes to his senses, he hears sounds coming from the attic. Up there he finds Hutch, praying to the goat, too afraid to move and too afraid to look up. After Luke wakes him up, Dom is found outside, half asleep, half awake, staring into the trees. It's going to put us there in the trees, he mumbles. They find Phil in an even worse state, tucked away in the corner of a small storage room, sheltering himself from whatever he saw in his dreams. All four agree that it's time to get out of the forest as soon as possible. It doesn't help that the sunlight uncovers Nordic runes that were carved into the trees around the shack. They don't want to talk about their dreams, fearing that putting them in words would let them escape from the confines of their mind. They ate half their food that night, expecting only one more full day of hiking, so they need to get out of the forest today. However, they are pretty much lost and relying on an overgrown trail that's not on a map. Luke says that it would be better to trace their footsteps back to the place where they came from. But Dom and Phil don't want to add another day to the hiking trip, even more so a day on an empty stomach. So it's up to Hutch to decide, and in the end, they will try to make it through the forest. Once again, Luke's idea is dismissed. So they go. The trail twists and turns, leading them in the wrong direction. Luke isn't angry just with Dom and Phil anymore. He's also angry with Hutch, because he was the one that came up with the forest shortcut. On the way they see two more houses, but decide to not investigate. Dom's knee pain gradually slows them down to a halt, and Luke decides to scout ahead. Alone, he follows the trail further. At some point it goes through a dense dry patch of forest, and he's forced to crawl through a path carved by animals. At the other side, he finds something that takes his breath away. A graveyard and a church. He sprints back to inform the others, but finds them crawling at a snail's pace, laughing about something. It's almost as if they aren't stuck in a forest with a single day of food left. It's almost as if all the strange occurrences didn't happen to them. Of course it makes Luke angry, especially when Dom starts questioning why he dumped his gear ahead. "Are you even taking this seriously?" he asked, and immediately wished he hadn't when he saw Dom and Hutch's surprised faces. "Course we are, you silly arse," Dom barked. "Think that I'm enjoying this?" Hutch said, "Dom," quietly. But there was something in that rebuke, something about Dom's flat, stolid, scowling face, and something in Hutch's supporting grin. Luke has had enough. He is no longer willing to endure this constant humiliation. And why should he? Why should he take this from a short, fat weakling? He pushes Dom and Dom punches him in return. This is exactly what Luke wanted, and he proceeds to paint his face red. Hutch and Phil just watch, not sure how to react. At the end, Dom is laying on the ground, crying. Not because of fear or pain, but because of anger and humiliation. But after they are separated, Dom has another salvo of insults for Luke. About how he's insane, can't hold a job, is always single, and about how all of them are wasting their time with him. Luke turns around and goes for another round, this time breaking his nose and cracking a tooth. Hutch takes Luke aside and tries to talk some sense to him. "Didn't know you had it in you, Chief. God knows I thought of giving Dom a shoeing over the years, but people like us just don't do things this way. What were you thinking?" Luke looked at Hutch and saw the disappointment in his friend's eyes. The permanent estrangement. You could never come back from an event like this. Nothing would ever be the same again. He knew his friendship was over with all three of them. Luke is fine with letting things go with Dom and Phil, but Hutch, well, that hurts. Regret sets in, but it's too late. For now, all of them are in this together, so it's time to continue in the direction of the graveyard. When they arrive, Hutch is fascinated. The wooden church has to be extremely old. The carvings in the walls suggest that it's not Christian, it's pagan. The rotten floor of the church breaks underneath Hutch. It's revealed that bones of both animals and men are hidden under the floor. They don't make much of it, and assume it's a crypt. Whatever the purpose of the place is, it would be one of the most impressive archaeological finds in Europe. As they are talking about becoming famous, they get interrupted by... well, I'll just read it to you. They looked at each other and were both beginning to crack mad grins. when Phil started shouting outside. So at least for me, that sentence kind of took away a lot of the tension, but yes, Phil did indeed scream outside. Now he's standing there, his pants down, staring at the trees. When he was taking a piss, something in the forest didn't look right. So he focused his gaze onto whatever it was, and then it moved. Even worse, Hutch finds more bones, but these ones are a lot less old, and smashed to pieces. Some of them are the remains of children. I have to clarify, from the beginning of the book up until now, it's still raining. They try to make it to the edge of the forest, but by the evening, they're still deep in the woods. There is no other choice than to set up their tents and take a rest considering the state in which Dom and Phil happen to be in. They make dinner, yet still feel unsatisfied after consuming some of their last food. Now they are down to 4 energy bars each and a communal chocolate bar. The situation is grim. It's not helped by the fact that their friend group has effectively fallen apart. Luke wants to apologize to Dom, but at the same time feels frustrated that none of them are ever capable of showing any empathy towards him. He'd begin to catch people exchanging glances whenever he spoke up in group situations. Or they would be half smiling when he entered the offices and warehouses he worked in. But he never stayed for very long because he moved on to something else equally unsatisfactory. Invitations to join others lessened, then ceased before he was 32. Only damaged and insecure women seemed to find comfort in his company, though they had little interest in him besides his being a confirming presence. By 34 he was lonely, genuine. An attempt at an apology is answered by Dom with an insult, and Luke is angry again. Luke is sick of analyzing his own feelings, especially when they boil down to the cycle of self-pity, anger and regret. But this time he won't have it. He wants to talk it out, because tomorrow they'll get out of the forest and never see each other again, or at least that's what he thinks. Ah, here we go again, Dom said. Luke took a deep breath, paused, looked at the end of his cigarette. You've been on my case since London. You think I'm happy being the butt of all your jokes, mate? Oh, poor you, boo fucking who. You're doing it again, belittling me. Why? Can it, Luke? Hutch said, his voice sounding tired. Why? Why is it whenever I speak it's too tedious for you all to listen? What do I say that is so inappropriate or stupid? Maybe it is, Dom said. Luke ignored the comment, knowing it was an attempt to get back at him for the humiliation Dom felt about the fight. I can't believe any of us used to be friends. Dom kept it up. We're not anymore, so don't strain yourself. After a couple more pages of dialogue, they get to the core issue. Dom says, do you think your philosophy impresses anyone with any responsibility in their lives? You said back in Stockholm that you have made other choices. What choices? What have you done with your life? Really? What have you got to show for yourself? Luke leaned forward, his voice raised until he became too conscious of it and lowered it. It's not a competition. I don't want what you have. I genuinely don't. But this is a lie. Luke is envious of what they have. A family, a career, he wants those things too. But he made his choices and can't turn back time. He loathed himself for desiring acceptance, when he also knew how thwarted every job and relationship made him feel. After Phil and Dom fall asleep, Luke has a conversation with Hutch. And well, turns out it's not sunshine and roses on the other side either. Both are having relationship issues and are separated from their wives. Both are in debt. Phil's business went bankrupt, and the wealth was the only thing his wife liked about him. Dom's wife has a mental illness that takes her out of the picture, and he now has to take care of his autistic kids. Plus there is debt, a lot of it. Luke suddenly feels bad again, but how could he know that they were going through such tough times? The plan is to go to sleep. Then, the next morning, Luke wakes up early and sets off on his own to try and get out of the forest and call a rescue. And there it is again, the sound of branches being splintered somewhere in the darkness, outside of their tents. Hutch brushes it off. It's just falling wood. But then, something between a jackal's bark and cow-like coughing echoes through the forest. Hutch, an experienced outdoorsman, takes it lightly. He needs to remain sane, so he assures Luke that it might be a badger or something. Big mistake. Luke wakes up from another nightmare, realizing the screaming is real and not his. It takes him a while to get out of his sleeping bag, but as soon as he does, he sees that the tent Dom and Hutch shared is torn apart. Dom is sitting in the middle of the mayhem, covered in blood. There is no Hutch. Dom doesn't know what happened, except that Hutch was taken taken away. And by the amount of blood, they don't have a lot of time before it's gonna be too late for him. They wander around in the woods aimlessly for 2 hours, but can't find him. Both Dom and Phil are paralyzed with fear and unable of thinking clearly. It's up to Luke to pick up the mantle of leadership. He can't leave them on their own and go ahead as he planned. They scrap together the most important gear, and even though Dom objects, Phil agrees with Luke. They have to go south before that thing comes back for them. And on their way they find Hutch, displayed in the trees as if the killer knew they would pass through there. His body was opened under the ribcage, revealing his organs to the world. His arms are arranged in a crucified position. And there it is, the jackal barking in between the trees. Unlike Dom and Phil, Luke's response is to fight. He takes out a knife and rushes to follow the sound, but can't find the source. He returns to his friends and starts interrogating them. But Dom can't entertain the thought of something sinister lurking in the forest. He latches onto the hope that it's a bear or maybe a human. Luke tells them about his dreams and about the bodies at the church. Phil finally realizes that not talking about it won't make it go away. Phil swallowed, took a breath. They sacrificed people, I think, in that house to something a long time ago. Luke nodded. When that church was open for business and that cemetery wasn't so overgrown, the people in that basement were, in a really bad way, murdered. Phil raised his face to look at a portion of a sky visible through the canopy. They hung them, strung them up for it. I think it was younger then, but it's still here. They're gone, the old people I saw in my dream, who fed it. But it is still here. They pick up a better pace this time. Luke is carrying most of the luggage and takes responsibility for his 2 cripples. Unlike in the movie, the forest in the book doesn't have some sort of a magical barrier that prevents them from leaving. The place is just way too large. They lost their way, and since it's a virgin forest, traversal is extremely difficult. After a long and painful day, it becomes clear that another night out is unavoidable. With their last strength, they get onto a hill and set up a campsite. Dom's knee is forcing him to crawl at this point. Phil sets out to make a fire, while Luke climbs on top of a tree to get a view of the surroundings. The edge of the forest is in sight. A mere 6 or 7 kilometers away, they have hope. But as he's up there and Dom is resting in the tent, the thing takes Phil. It's not dramatic. They hear a scream and then nothing. Just like that, our cast is reduced to 2 characters, trying to cope with the insane situation they're in. Leaning against each other's back, this might be their last chance to talk things out. Faced with the prospect of something distinctly inhuman lurking around them, it's not hard to accept each other's humanity. Both apologize to each other. Both weren't happy with their lives and were jealous of one another. Dom, tied down by his family and career, wanted to experience some of the freedom Luke enjoyed. Luke, not having any direction in life, would love to have someone to live for. But in reality, both are jealous of an imaginary life the other person built on lies. This is how a lot of friendships between men work. You want to impress the others while not being impressed yourself. The sound starts again. Luke goes to investigate, and in that moment, he detects movement behind him. He turns around, and just in time for the trees to close behind Dom. His friend is sitting there not aware of what happened. This is how the creature hunts. It uses sound to distract them and separate them. Since it moves so quickly and so quietly, it almost snatched Dom while Luke was looking away. Dom tells Luke that if they survive until the morning, he needs to go ahead. Dom already knows that he can't possibly make it out alive. But Luke is not leaving him behind. As the night comes, they are supposed to change guards. Since Dom is unable to keep awake, it's not really possible. Instead, it's only Luke that sits there and stares into the forest. At the edge of his peripheral vision, there is a large shadow that just looks odd. It's the type of thing you'd notice only if you are being actively hunted. He wakes up Dom and shines his light in between the trees. The creature retreats into the forest and starts circling the hilltop. The foliage is shaking all around them, but due to the darkness, they can't tell where it is. At some point it stops and Luke throws a stone, hitting the creature. It shrieks, and in a second, something emerges from the woods and cracks his skull. Luke wakes up with a piece of cloth tied around his head. Good news is that he probably did some damage with the rock. The creature didn't come back. Bad news is that he probably has a skull fracture. The 2 cripples stumble down the hill and leave most of their gear behind. They either make it out today or remain in the forest forever. When they pass Phil's corpse, displayed in the same way as Hutch before, they refuse to look up and instead keep going. both badly injured, without water and food. They sink to all fours and crawl from then on. It's getting dark again, and Luke doesn't have the energy to look behind at Dom anymore. He feels Dom's presence following him, and he smells his terrible stench. It takes him a while to realize that no man can smell so putrid. This is the smell of a carnivore. When he finally looks behind him, there is no more Dom. Of course it hurts Luke, but at this point, what else can he do but keep going? He crawls, now hallucinating from the lack of water, food and energy. He slips from reality to dream and back. He sees tiny white little figures dancing around him. He can no longer move, leans against a tree and accepts his death. When he opens his eye, he can see the red dusk piercing through the trees. The edge of the forest is in sight, but it matters little. In between those trees, he can see a dark figure, almost indistinguishable from the rest of the woods. He can only see it because the red sun falling behind the horizon is illuminating its presence. His vision can't make out any features apart from it being tall, at least 3 times as tall as a man. But it matters not. This is his final resting place. He goes to sleep. This is the end of the first part, but it's not the end of the book. As someone who watched the movie first, nothing could prepare me for how different the following arc is. The story about friendship is over. The story about hate begins. Luke wakes up strapped to a bed in a run-down wooden house. No longer being able to tell reality from dream, he notices old people entering and leaving his room. They speak Swedish or maybe Norwegian. Then the old people are gone and you are alone in the cold metal basin. But something is coming down from the room upstairs. You can hear its bone feet on the wooden steps of a staircase outside the room. And you can hear the sound of something squeezing its body down and through a narrow passage, accompanied by quick guts of excited breath. A thick shape fills the doorway of your room. You scream when you realize it is coming through on all fours, with the long horns out front. Luke wakes up from what I can only describe as one of the few successful jump scares in literature. Music is playing, screams, bass and drums coming out of an old speaker. Next to the bed are 3 upright figures, a goat, a hare and a lamb. The goat removes his mask and reveals a human face, albeit painted white and black. Luke asks where he is and the man replies, south of heaven. Who are they? The Wild Hunt, the final gathering. The lamb mask was hiding a feminine-looking boy, and the hare mask was concealing a fat girl. They are in their late teens and all covered in face paint. Luke begs them to call an ambulance and the police, but they tell him in a heavy Norwegian accent that there is no such thing here. He's lucky to be alive. Very lucky. They walk out of the room and lock the door. The next time he wakes up, an old lady enters accompanied by the tall feminine guy from before. The woman gives him food but can't speak English. The boy doesn't seem to be worried with Luke's condition at all. Instead, he introduces himself as Fenris. His other friend is Loki, and the girl is Surtr. He asks Luke where he's from, and after learning he's from London, why did he come here? Luke says that it was supposed to be a holiday, which makes Fenris laugh. He doesn't seem to be interested in hearing about the deaths or Luke's injuries. Instead, he directs the conversation towards music. Luke isn't into black metal, but works at a CD shop, so he knows some bands. The youth promises to educate him, especially in relation to Blood Frenzy, which is his band. Luke calls him Fenris from Sweden, which offends him. Norway, I am a Norwegian, a Viking, he says. After some more chat, they leave and once again lock the room. Luke is getting angry and annoyed by his hosts. There is a small window through which he can see the 3 youths making fires outside, listening to black metal, dancing and drinking. Only the old woman who fed him seems to be from there, and it goes beyond him why she tolerates their presence. Fenris comes back to show him some black metal photos he doesn't care about. Luke thinks to himself, and why they produce such music in the social utopia of Scandinavia puzzled him. Perhaps it was a protest to being the most spoiled people in Europe, an act of rebellion against having everything. When it's revealed that Luke doesn't know about Bloody Frenzy, their band, he gets slapped in the face. But Luke won't take it anymore. He tells him he is not interested in his devil-worshipping bullshit. Fenris goes to explain his view on the matter. He clenched both his hands into fists, closed his eyes, gritted his teeth into a snarl. See how Christians poison us. We can only call things by their names. It is Odin, Great Wotan, who mutters in our blood. What Christians say is evil is our religion. We are warriors. Wild, you know. We are open to nature. We feel no pity. Sure, okay. Luke did not know what else to say. Fenris goes to explain his religion and philosophy in more detail. Fenris's blood is speaking to him. The blood told him to burn a church, he burned a church. It told him to kill an immigrant, he killed an immigrant. He is a Viking, and the devil no longer interests him. That's a Christian concept. The old gods are calling him, he explains. Same as they called the Germans in the 30s. It's nothing new. It's the very mundane and unimpressive mixture of paganism and Nazism. They came to honor the creature in the forest, which they call a god. Luke knows that whatever they want to do with him, it won't be good. He attempts to knock out Fenris with a mug. He almost succeeds, but unfortunately, the girl comes just in time to intervene. Surtr barges into the room and immobilizes him. She wants to kill him, but the third one, Loki, stops her. In the night, Luke hears voices coming from the attic. Every time he moves, light footsteps above him follow. He tries talking to whoever is up there, but to no avail. Luke dreams about the small white figures that he dreamt about back when he was crawling out of the forest. They are dancing outside the house, around a stone chamber. The chamber is filled with bones. That's where they'll put him. And then the creature will come out of the forest. Luke is woken up by Loki. He tells him that his friend Dom had come for a visit. They take Luke outside and laugh as he realizes what happened. Dom is impaled up in the tree crowns facing the meadow. Fenris is ecstatic. He thinks that their music summoned the god, and this is a gift. Loki talks about how this is the most remote place in Scandinavia, a place where Odin still rules. Luke decides to try and make a run for it, but he doesn't have a chance with arms tied at his wrist. Surtr catches him and puts her knees on his arms. I would appreciate it if the author didn't describe the smell between her legs in as much detail as he did. I decided against reading the passage to you out loud because I like my audience. They don't kill Luke, they just lock him away again. At this point, it's apparent to him that he is about to get sacrificed. When Loki comes to visit again, they have the same conversation Luke had with Fenris. He points to all the pentagrams and upside-down crosses tattooed on Loki's body. It implies that when he was in his church-burning phase, he used to worship the devil. Some of those churches are hundreds of years old. He was burning a part of his culture, a part of his nation's history. But now he covers his body with pagan tattoos and suddenly claims to care about his blood and people. Loki doesn't get angry. He is calm and replies, "You know, Luke, I miss fighting the church, the Christians. At least real Christians have the balls to judge me. You are with us or you are damned. We learned that from them. It is true. To be absolutist, fascistic, I like their steel." He goes on about how this forest is untouched by immigrants, gays and social democrats. They have woken up something ancient and will be there when the old gods return. It's about blood and soil. They killed 9 people and enjoy precisely that it happened in a safe country like Norway, where nobody would expect it. He has a long monologue about how devil worship was a good start, but to really defeat Judaism, Christianity and Islam, they need to go deeper, back in time. Bring on the Ragnarok. Luke is not impressed. Loki even admits that he doesn't really know what is hiding in the forest. Yet he seems to have this picture painted by his ideology. There is, however, some useful insight. The old woman is one of the last original settlers, and the thing they worship goes by many names in that part of Scandinavia. The Christians call it the Black Yule Goat, not a proper name for a god, but that's what it is, a god. At least, according to Loki. Luke doesn't give in and he tells him that it's not a god. A god wouldn't have his place of worship fall into ruin. Whatever it is, it's on the verge of extinction. Civilization will come for the forest and the old woman will die, its last worshipper. It's over. All the blood will be spilled for nothing. The next day he is taken to the attic. Surtr doesn't follow the boys because she is scared of what's up there. Even Loki and Fenris seem to be frightened. The entire room is lined with chairs, and on those chairs, in their eternal rest, sit the Ancient Ones. Luke thinks about how the terrible things in the first house and the church were already fucked up enough. And even then, it's not enough for these people. They just have to decorate everything with corpses. But then he notices the gentle sound, the breaths, the clicking of jaws. They might look like corpses, but they are alive. And what sort of alive that is. Unable to move, deprived of most senses, but still here to serve the thing in the forest. The old woman is there as well. She takes out a knife and one of the figures speaks with what is left of its mouth. They demand a sacrifice, but the youths won't have it. They take Luke away and lock him back in his room. He can hear the argument through the walls. The woman is angry and then starts crying. In a strange way, he feels bad for her. The three youths start their usual dancing, drinking and screaming to black metal music outside. They constructed an upside-down cross, surely intended for Luke. He describes it like this. And so it all continued. It was dull in its predictability. Evil was, he decided, inevitable, relentless and predictable. Imaginative, he'd give it that much, but so was. The old woman comes to prepare him for the sacrifice. Not the one she wanted to do, but the one Loki had in mind. To awaken the old god. He finds comfort in her presence. She washes him, gives him a crown of flowers, and he cries into her shoulder. The bones of men and beasts, the skeletons of forsaken homes, the forgotten places of worship, now bound them each to the other. He had come here living and warm, but now must become of it. There was no other place for him in the world, not anymore. He thinks about the creature he is about to be sacrificed to, and its last true worshipper. And I think this is a beautiful part of the book. It might be my favorite. He knows that if the youth see that creature as God, then it's not a god with that sort of weight. It's not almighty, and it's not about to deliver a Ragnarok. And in his awe and steadily growing comprehension at what existed out here, at this miraculous and dreadful thing, he suspected it was not long for this world either. What was extraordinary was how it had survived for so long. But its rule was over. It was endangered, an isolated god, all but forgotten and long demented. Branded a false god by the sign of the cross, its adultery rotted in forgotten attics now. And about it false prophets and rag messiahs gathered. Luke is taken outside and tied to the cross. Then it's flipped upside down and made to face the forest. There is not much resistance from Luke, he accepted his fate. He thinks about how much he hates the three teenagers, everything they stand for. As the blood rushes into his head, he loses consciousness. He once again dreams about those white figures. They want him to understand. Understand why his friends are dead and why all of this needs to happen. Suddenly he finds himself in some sort of a barn. A woman is giving birth. Amidst the cacophony of her screams and the sounds of livestock, a circle of figures forms around the woman. The mother dies before the child is born, and out of her lifeless body, they pull out a baby. But its legs aren't human. Luke wakes up, but not entirely. He is surrounded by the Ancient Ones, the Things in the attic. The old woman cuts into him, opening something deep inside, something primal buried in his body. And out of that hole comes out the animal part of him that just wants to survive. When he wakes up for real, he notices it's day. The ritual didn't work, the creature didn't answer the call. He is untied, his room is unlocked, and there is a knife on his bed. The old woman wants him to kill the false messiahs of her god, but he will kill neither for her nor for the thing in the forest. He is aware that his entire life led up to this situation. This is his final reckoning. No more being the victim, no more mercy. In this part of the world, the old rules still apply. You are the hunter, or you are the prey. He gets out of his cell and enters the kitchen where Fenris is sleeping. There is a bolt-action rifle in the corner, but for whatever reason, it doesn't shoot. Fenris wakes up and charges at Luke with a knife. But he only cuts into his thigh, and Luke is able to inflict a lot more damage with a stab to his neck. Bleeding out, Fenris crawls out of the room, and Luke finally manages to turn off the safety on the rifle. Loki rushes down the stairs just in time to get shot. Fenris managed to crawl a couple meters away from the house, but it's no use. Luke kills him and then goes for Surtr. All of this while the old woman is sitting in the kitchen, observing the entire thing. He manages to outflank Surtr, who was trying to ambush him but doesn't kill her. She runs off into the woods. There is a pickup truck offering him a chance for escape, but just as he gets the keys, he hears singing. The old woman is now standing outside, facing the forest, and chanting. He can make out a single word, a word similar in most Germanic languages. She is calling for her mother. A primal fear tells him exactly what he's supposed to do. He shoots the woman, and for the first time, he sees what is underneath her long dress. A pair of legs, bent in the wrong way at the knee joints, with hooves instead of feet. Luke has a breakdown, struggling to accept what he's about to do next. Then he gets up and makes his way to the attic, determined to end the rule of the Black Goat. One by one, he slits the throats of the ancient things that once used to be human. All this time they were coming into his dreams as those white figures. Now they can dream no more. In response, he hears that loud, devilish, jackal-like sound coming out of the woods. The cry of an isolated god who just lost his last worshippers. He rushes down to the truck, the forest around him shaking in rage. A large black presence is felt all around the house. He jumps into the car but has so much trouble starting it up. He lives in London and hasn't driven in years. Finally, the truck starts up and he makes it into the forest. He tries to control the vehicle to the best of his ability, but the road is terrible and he gets stuck. When the engine finally starts up again and the wheels start moving, he looks into the rearview mirror. A large black limb that seems to disappear as soon as he sees it. Surtur, the girl that ran to the forest, is dropped on the bed of the pickup truck, her ribcage torn apart. The car starts moving again. Slowly driving forward, he allows himself another look behind. There is a tall black figure with legs bending the wrong way at the knee joint. It starts pursuing him and catches up quickly. The car is stopped and he hears the creature getting on top of it. In his side window he catches a glimpse of the monster's eye. And then it's gone again. He revs up the engine and resumes his escape. It's not fast, he can't really go past second gear. And after a couple minutes, the road opens up and reveals the creature. A tall, lanky figure. Its eyes human, sentient. Its features goatish. Its teeth yellow and long, resembling something that should have been long extinct. Its head is decorated with a pair of mighty horns. It's charging at his car and he is charging at it. Through the windscreen it goes. A struggle ensues with the car shaking violently. In a desperate last-ditch attempt, Luke reaches for the knife and repeatedly stabs the head that filled the cabin. Warm blood fills the car and then it's gone. The car is ruined. The steering wheel is no more. But so is the yipping and coughing, the sounds of a forgotten god no longer echoing through the woods. Luke limps out of the forest, victorious. Maybe he was the last person to encounter it. Maybe not. It matters little. The only thing on Luke's mind now is to get back to London. To get back to his situationship and dead-end job. Brown girls and CDs. That's his life, and he is sure that he will enjoy every moment of it. There are so many things I like about the ritual. Of course, I like the dynamic of the friend group in the first half, and that's what I see a lot of people online praise about the book. The movie can't afford to have these long inner monologues. Adam Neville said that there aren't many books about run-of-the-mill millennial men, and that's what got him writing this. But you don't have to be a millennial to relate to some aspects of their friendship. If you haven't seen the movie, it follows the first half fairly accurately. And as with the book, that's the quote-unquote scary part of the movie. Because the creature isn't revealed yet. Once you play your cards, horror often stops being scary. The filmmakers knew this, and that's why they end the movie pretty quickly. They came up with an amazing monster design. Of course it has antlers. If you've seen my antlerification video, this shouldn't be a surprise. Everything needs to have antlers. But that one gets a pass, because it's really cool. And while you don't finish the movie scared, you finish it feeling like it wasn't a waste of time. The reveal paid off because in the end, the creature was so interesting. The book takes a different approach. It puts you in the shoes of Luke, for whom the entity becomes effectively an all-powerful horror by the end of the first half. And then it de-escalates. The reader is introduced to new characters, a new place, and the creature is out of the picture for a pretty long time. You get new antagonists and slowly Luke's perspective changes. The thing in the woods is weak, dying, slowly being driven to a smaller and smaller patch of land. So the author prepares you for the inevitable. The final showdown can't ever live up to the hype. And after this de-escalation, after the ritual fails, comes the second scene in the attic, when Luke kills the Ancient Ones and the god in the woods starts screaming. It's just Luke and the heart of the forest boiling with rage. Obviously, you'd have to read it to experience it in that way, but there is something about that scene that makes it so beautiful. It's only horror that can make me feel this way. There is one more thing I really like. The free use from the second half. Listen, if you happen to be a neo-pagan, it's nothing personal. I bet there are many wonderful people within your community. But I personally really can't stand most attempts at reviving the old faith here in Europe. The reason is simple, I feel like most of it is not genuine. Whenever pagans say the word ancestor, I cringe. Your most important ancestors are your parents. And instead of looking at the religion of your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, you look hundreds of generations back to someone who worshipped something you don't understand. For that reason, much of the music, clothing, and rituals associated with the neo-pagan movement are made up. And that's fine, a lot of those Nordic Viking fans acknowledge that it's just a fantasy. But then why, if you are all about your ancestors, you decide to worship in ways invented in the last couple of decades? And it's a shame because what is left of paganism in Europe is really cool. I don't want to share what country I'm from on this channel, just think of me as a random Slav. But I vividly remember the quote-unquote pagan rituals that survived in my region. Of course they were changed and in some instances made to fit monotheism, but they're still here, preserved through generations and generations. And the thought of some neo-pagan introducing throat singing and antlers into our tradition to make it more cool and primal, that would be pretty fucking lame. And the way in which the kids in the book try to awake the old gods with black metal and bonfires to no avail obviously, that clicked with me. This attempt at reviving something ancient without knowing what it entails, it's really done well in this book. And the way Luke gets annoyed with them, it resonates with me deeply. Obviously the youths in the book aren't just neo-pagan. They are the gayest, lamest archetype of person, the type that blends paganism with Nazism. These are people that utterly hate their region and people. They aren't actually religious, you can't believe in God because you think it's cool, that's not how faith works. Maybe these people are born into a Christian or Muslim family, but they take a look at their parents and, wouldn't you know it, they are just ordinary people. So they have to come up with this fantasy version of their ancient ancestors, which has nothing to do with reality. And here in the book they get their old god. But in a similar manner as their pre-Christian ancestors weren't some sort of Übermenschen, their ancient god is also remarkably undivine. Big for a human, small for a god. They are teenagers wanting to live in a fantasy land. They talk about blood and soil and about how the stronger prevail. Yet when it turns out that the stronger do indeed prevail, it's just not them, they beg for mercy. Okay, yapping's over, there should be more videos now because I got done with my semester. If you're new here, please subscribe. I make content about horror and Eastern Europe. Sometimes even both. But now that I think about it, I'm actually just gonna use this channel for whatever I want. For as long as I can remember, I have been fascinated with ancient gods. I grew up reading Lovecraft and obsessing over weird cults and religions. Deities at the center of worship, being forgotten, only to be rediscovered by an unsuspecting passerby, is one of my favorite tropes in horror. Not because I find it particularly scary, quite the opposite. Whenever people talk about cosmic horror, the fear they describe comes from insignificance. The human is met with something he can't understand. Something way older than him and infinitely more powerful. I guess it never really worked on me because it seems so non-personal. The relationship between the individual and these godlike beings isn't that different from the one between the individual and large institutions. The corporation you work for can deprive you of your livelihood tomorrow, and the state you live in can send you to a war the day after that. And while that is terrifying once it happens, I don't lose sleep anticipating that day. It's only because the individual is insignificant to the above mentioned that he can escape their wrath. And I like those stories, and that's why I love cosmic horror. Not because it's scary, but because I want to see a man confront something he can't possibly defeat. He might be insignificant on the cosmic scale, but he doesn't perceive the world through that lens. Maybe the protagonist has a family, or just wants to live another day. Why exactly should that be a less noble motivation than the so-called grand scheme of things? Black Mountainside might just be my favorite movie, and it managed to do so on a budget of $30,000. That isn't just low budget, in film production that's nothing. That's the price for a basic car, not a movie. Black Mountainside often gets compared to The Thing from 1982. That movie had a budget of 15 million, and even in that case the director used to always boast about how little money he had. Actually, people compare these two movies a lot. Both make heavy use of practical effects and both are about a remote crew finding something they shouldn't underneath the ice. But Black Mountainside is a fundamentally different story. The film is set around a research station in Canada, Yukon province. The Arctic climate makes it almost inhospitable to humans. 100 miles to the south lies a native reserve, To the north of the station, nothing. There was a conscious decision to not include any music in the movie. While the budget might have been a factor, the lack of a soundtrack combined with the long takes adds a lot to the immersion. The introductory scene, where 4 of our crew sit at a table and play poker, might not be the best written thing in the world, but it sets the tone for the entirety of the film. For the next hour and a half, the viewer won't get just action. There will be a lot of small talk and silence with only the Arctic wind serving as background. Our main protagonist, Professor Olson, arrives at the research station by helicopter. He is welcomed by Jensen, who is in charge of the place. Personally, I can't remember more than 2 names in a movie, so I won't introduce the rest of the crew. There is nothing special about most of the characters, maybe with the exception of Professor Olson wearing a fake Arc'teryx jacket. Olson, a well-renowned archaeologist, is here because the team found something groundbreaking. An ancient structure dating to 14,000 BCE, with all signs pointing to it being Mesoamerican. But Mesoamerican cultures are from Mexico and Central America. The team thinks that what they found is a roof of a structure built by some of the earliest people that set foot in the Americas. If they are right and the structure really is so old, then they might have uncovered the most important archaeological finding in recent history. But well, first they have to dig it out, and that's why they hired some of the natives from the reserve to come and help them. The wonderful thing about horror movies is that the sets don't have to be expensive to work well. The cabins where the crew lives have these small, claustrophobic rooms. Most of them have a window with a view of the site which is lit up by lights at night. The forest beyond is pitch dark. I like when movies play into the fear of seeing something in the woods, not being sure whether it's just a shadow or something else. Things start going south pretty quickly. A cat, the only pet animal at the station, is torn to shreds and laid down in front of the excavation site. The native workers blame one of the crew members, but he has no memory of killing the cat. From that point, things just escalate. The native workers leave, in the middle of the night, minus 50 degrees. The team assumes they left for the reserve, but their tracks lead north, towards nothing but certain death. What's worse, the radio stops working. The last link to the outside world is gone. One of the crew members throws up some sort of a black liquid at the table. It's apparent now that things aren't right. Luckily, they have a doctor on the site and he gives him a throughout check. The best guess? A flu. A logical explanation. After all, Olson came to the site recently. He could have transmitted the disease. So the workers are gone, there is no potential disease outbreak, no contact with the outside, and nothing much to do. Olson immerses himself in work and comes up with a hypothesis. The entire place is marked with stones. The natives place them to mark an important location, maybe a hunting spot for deer or bear. He is assured by his colleague that while there are bears in the area, the site is surrounded by bear traps. As for the deer, it seems to be a recurring theme in all the ancient carvings, some sort of a godlike being. It's here that we get one of my favorite scenes. It's one of the crew members lying in bed smoking. We don't know much about him apart from the fact that he's the only one who planned to stay at the station during the winter. Then it might be just him and 1 or 2 other people. The thought visibly horrifies him. While the acting in the movie can be rough at times, I consider this scene to be perfectly made. It's obvious that he doesn't want to look towards the site. He finally finds the courage to shift his gaze towards the window and short after to look outside. He doesn't see anything, but the movements of his body give away a lot of anxiety. Anxiety that there really is something out there. And maybe there really is something out there, but one of the crew members definitely has something growing inside of him. Olson is woken up in the middle of the night. The guy who threw up is sick, really sick. They rush to the doctor's shack and find him screeching in pain. There is something moving underneath the skin of his right arm. A decision is made to amputate the limb, and in a span of few seconds, the arm is cut off with a fire axe and burned with a coal shovel. No one sleeps the following night, and a voice starts talking to the crew. He wants them to see what is outside their windows. The guy who found the courage to look in the previous nights cuts off his own hand, seemingly for no good reason. There are depictions of limbless people in the archaeological findings. Olson concludes that there is a strong chance that whatever disease is spreading, it might have ravaged the original inhabitants as well, thousands of years ago. Through the eyes of one of the crew members, the archaeological assistant, we finally get to see what is outside the site. The voice guides him to look past the mountains